Good morning. I am Cecilia Rouse. I am the president of the Brookings Institution, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's forum. Today, thank you all for being here. Some of you are here in person, and we'd really love to see you here in person, and I say hello as well to those who are on Zoom. Before I kick things off, I want to extend my deep gratitude to President Gayle and to everyone at Spelman for your amazing hospitality this week. Helene has been such a steadfast partner to Brookings with her leadership on our board of trustees and now by inviting us to this phenomenal campus. So truly, I want to thank her for all of that. And for those of you who don't know us, the Brookings Institution is a nonpartisan think tank in Washington, D.C. We conduct research across this country and around the globe to affect policy at local, national, and global levels. We are here as part of our Election 24 Issues at Stake initiative. As we think about the upcoming election, two statistics from the Pew Research Center jump out at me. The first is that 78% of Americans believe there is too little attention paid to important issues facing the country. And second, 86% of Americans believe that, and I quote, Republicans and Democrats are more focused on fighting each other than solving problems, unquote. In short, what the vast majority of Americans want is more policy over politics. So our Election 24 initiative is committed to focusing on substantive issues affecting Americans and not just the horse race. Today, we will focus on one of those substantive issues, artificial intelligence. We kicked off our programming yesterday with a rich discussion featuring Dr. Alondra Nelson, one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in AI. Our conversation will be available on the Brookings website for those of you who were unable to attend in person. This morning, we continue with a deeper understanding of the promises and perils of artificial intelligence and how public policy can help us tackle them, calling on the expertise of Brookings Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technology, what we refer to as AIET initiative. This initiative brings together scholars from across the institution to provide timely analyses to help our nation's leaders and their global partners find solutions that responsibly minimize technology's harms while allowing us to harness its transformative benefits. To frame the issue, I would like to introduce Dr. Nicol Turner-Lee, a senior fellow in the Brookings Governance Studies Program and director of the Brookings Center for Technology Innovation. Dr. Turner-Lee's research sits at the intersection of technology and social justice as a sociologist working in tech policy. In 2023, she developed and launched the AI Equity Lab, which is focused on advancing ethical, inclusive, and non-discriminatory autonomous models and systems throughout the United States and abroad. She has many publications and has testified before various congressional and international bodies. Last month, I should have the book, she released her first book, Digitally Invisible, How the Internet is Creating the New Underclass, which explores not just digital equity among vulnerable populations, but also offers a roadmap towards a more democratized access to technology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Turner-Lee to the stage.
Oh, you have the book. I have the book. Oh. I carry this always. Well, thank you so much, Cecilia, for that kind introduction. And can we give my boss a round of applause? She is a representation of true Black womanhood as our president of the Brookings Institution. So we want to just say thank you. And first and foremost, I also want to say, good morning, Spelman. I've been wanting to say this for a really long time in my work, so I am just so overjoyed to be with all of you today. To our dear president here, Dr. Gayle, who is also a Brookings trustee, to our provost, Dr. Scott Johnson, to Dr. Spence, my fellow sociologist, and to all of you in the, oh wait, yes, my new best friend, as we call it. I actually know people who had Dr. Spence when they were here many, many years ago, and they told me to give her a huge shout out. And to all of you in the room, how many of you are sociologists? Just raise your hand. Okay, I see a few. I'm just going to give them a little bit more preference as a sociologist. But to all the students who actually took the time to come this morning, we are deeply humbled and grateful for your presence. And we mean that because it is important for us as folks who work in the Washington, D.C. area, but more importantly, as people who are very much vested in your growth as we navigate through a very interesting society and times, for you to be here. And I'm excited because I get a chance to share some of my research. And more importantly, my hope is that you will see that what I do is accessible also to you. And so I want to stress that during these remarks. Some of you saw me yesterday, and I have the same message, that this is not an unattainable dream that you also can have. So please keep that in mind. Now, I've decided for this particular time that I have to really do something a little different. I believe that when you become before students, that it's important to do some level setting when it comes to what you are going to talk about. So the beginning of my conversation is actually a lecture. Yesterday, I had a chance to talk to you kind of about my book. Today, I'm going to teach you. And when I talk through these slides, I'm going to do that in a way that informs the rest of today. It is really important in a concept like artificial intelligence that we come to some leaning in on what we mean by that. So I just got a few bullets of what I'm going to do in this short period of time that I have, and I promise I will not be like a Black Baptist preacher and have more than 3 points, right? I will stay on task, right? But my hope is that we'll define artificial intelligence, we'll share strategies and solutions, and most importantly, we'll leave to encourage you to be the next group of unhidden figures. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the talk. So let me just ask a framing question before I jump into what is AI. How many of you on a Saturday night do like me sometimes and watch movies on streaming devices? And how many of you, after about 8 hours sitting in front of your TV, keep getting this thing throughout the 8 hours that says, would you like to watch this one? And what about this one? That's how they get you, right? And then next thing you know, it's like morning time and you have to finish that series. That is what's called a recommendation algorithm. It is basically watching what you watch or seeing what you watch and recommending and positioning content that is very similar. I'm a very much of a genre like suspense, so I watch all the suspense movies when they're on Netflix. How many of you, when you're actually shopping for somebody or you're shopping for yourself, you get these recommendations of the next thing to buy? I get it all the time. I am a huge fan of tweed jackets, and you could rest assured that that is all on my feed, right? I think I got every type of tweed jacket available. Well, that is what's called an advertising or positioning algorithm that actually situates itself because it knows your profile. It knows what you buy, it knows when you buy it, and it's not a bad idea because it's quite innocuous. But how many of you also know that when you are doing those purchases, it's also picking up other stuff about you on the internet? So when I buy my tweed jackets, I'm also buying stuff for my daughter. So it may assume that I'm a mother. And when I'm buying so many tweed jackets, I'm checking my bank account. And it may assume that I'm budget conscious or broke. And when I'm doing all those things combined, it's essentially creating this composite footprint for how my algorithm is adapting to my behavior. Now, why I share that is I kind of don't mind because it knows what time I like to shop, what I like to shop for, who I'm shopping for. But my dear friend, Dr. LaTonya Sweeney at Harvard University's Computer Science School says that if you do that and the internet realizes that your name is Shaquisha, Juan, Jose, or some Black or Latino sounding name, it will offer you a higher interest credit card. Come down my lane for a minute. I got into this space because that same Dr. Sweeney showed us for about 6 or 7 years ago a slide. It was the Omega Sci-Fi centennial anniversary, and she told us to look at that slide for 10 seconds, and when we looked at that slide, the advertisements that came up said, get your arrest record for free, Black men, and it had the highest interest credit card offering. So things that we do innocuously, looking for our tweed jackets, they result in these outcomes. So whereas it helps us, it has the potential of consequential outcomes. And for people of color in particular who are vulnerable financially, that actually perpetuates versus stops systemic discrimination when it comes to financial inequity and the wealth gap. So that's why I talk about this. I'm a sociologist, and I'm interested in social justice, technology, and race. And it's important that we position these things for our community, that we better understand how to protect ourselves. So I'd like to show this slide because it sort of gives you the melting pot of what AI is. AI is basically the big bubble. It's everything from autonomous vehicles to autonomous shopping to autonomous nurses, you name it, that's all AI. But in between that are these machine learning algorithms that basically program the AI. They're the repetitive sequence of computations, they're the computer science part of it, or data science part of it. And then there's deep learning. And deep learning basically manipulates those algorithms to actually elicit emotional or neurological response. Just to stay on my mode of teaching you, there are pre-screening applications that are online right now that people have to upload their video to be considered for an interview. In this particular case, we are finding that Black men and Hispanic men who load their video often do not get past the pre-screening process. And why is that? Because deep learning sort of is programmed to look for a couple of things. Does this person give eye contact? Are they smiling enough? Do they elicit a sense of safety? Don't let me go further on this because I promise not to scare you so early in my presentation. But these are the iterations from which AI evolves. And there are other cases that I'll talk about in a moment where it's much more promising. I think we heard Alondra say in healthcare yesterday. But I put at the end of this in the box, generative AI. And I only do that is because it's kind of hype right now and what generative AI is. And we still don't quite know the full capacity of that. Some of you may know about generative AI because, as I like to explain it, it's like having eyes in the back of the head. Compared to the previous model of machine learning algorithms, generative AI is already based on stuff that's on the internet. It's all your past. It's not your future. It's not predicting what you're going to do, like purchase that tweed jacket. It basically knows that you purchased that tweed jacket. It's a curated identity that you have. The other thing that generative AI has done, which has contributed to some of the hype, is that it has this ability to basically scrape and handle what's called large language models. How many of you in the room have heard that term used? LLMs. That means that's a combination of our voice, our text, our image, and generative models can essentially extract that value. So I'll give you a funny story. My 17-year-old came in the room the other day and she said, "Mommy, say hi." I said, "Hi." Then she turned around and she had me saying, "My daughter is excused from school today," because she had extracted my voice on this commercial tool. She then said to me, "Please don't tell Washington about this because it's pretty fun." I want to keep using it. I was like, "Girl, if that voice shows up at your school, I'm going to get my belt." Some of you are old enough to understand the belt. My point is, large language models are consuming the generative AI space. And these actually power what are called chatbots, other generative applications. I'm curious for my Spelman sisters, how many of you use generative AI for research? Critical inquiry. In my work, there's a huge debate right now whether or not students should use generative AI. And because I look at the intersection of race and social justice, my opinion is, if Jane is going to use it in the wealthy community, Johnny's got to use it on the other side of the river. If Jane is going to use it, Johnny's going to use it. But in the educational setting, it should be done constructively. So happy to come back and talk more about that. So what are the promises of AI? I've talked a little bit about some of those perils. I got ahead of myself. Well, obviously in our democracy, we're seeing the promise of AI when it comes to healthcare. There's beautiful examples of AI use, for example, during the pandemic that actually helped us to expedite emergency authorization on the vaccine. We're seeing it in education. One of the areas that I'm most interested in is called invisible assessments that allow students to be invisibly assessed where they don't feel like you're being put in a corner to be tested. Manufacturing is using AI. We're seeing precision within that industry in ways that we could not do it before. It can minimize the errors of humans because we are fallible people. We make mistakes. It's argued that computers can be more discreet. And it can free us up for more complex and sophisticated problem solving when we start talking about tasks. All of those combined, I think, are the future of the transformative capacity of AI. If you didn't know much about it, hopefully you know more today. But as I mentioned, we have to have areas of concern. And this is why we couch this as a promise and peril conversation. I live in this space of bias as a sociologist. This is the space in which I want to see how we actually make these tools transformative when it comes to tech, but we also are thinking about and interrogating these systems for racism and other inequalities. Bias can be introduced at any stage of an algorithmic model. It comes with who's sitting at the table, making the decision on the model's design and development. For computer scientists, sometimes it's not us. It comes in the stage of the training data. Who is training the data, or what information is being plugged into that data? My dear friend, I'll talk about it in a moment, Renee Cummings from the University of Virginia, my co-chair in the Equity Lab, calls it traumatized data. Because if the trauma, like I talked about with Dr. LaSweeney's work, is that an ethnic sounding name elicits bad credit, then that is what's training the model, which means that the result will always deny them credit worthiness. Come on with me on this one, folks. When we take those things together, we essentially create what has been called inferential economy that then allows these models to be sort of unhinged and untethered to being equitable, inclusive, and responsible. That's why there's a lot of work being done right now on ethical AI. And ethical AI from the sense that we're representing and understanding that we as individuals have intersectional identities. And guess what? Our laws only protect our federally protected characteristics, our race, our gender, our sexual orientation. But you remember what I said earlier. I'm a mother, I'm a researcher, I'm a sociologist, I'm all of those things and then some. And that is unchecked by models that do not necessarily always comply with the law. Examples show up in ad targeting. Talked about that already with Omega Sci-Fi. Shows up in employment bias. My dear friend and colleague Molly Kinder will talk about that later today. It shows up in search query misrepresentation. It was an example that also interested me in this space where African Americans were being tagged in photos at the time, right, as primates. And now with artificial intelligence, we can actually expedite and make with more precision. I think we heard about deep fakes yesterday of Vice President Harris. Criminal justice. I spent 2 years on the National Academies of Sciences Executive Office Commissioned Council on the use of facial recognition by police. It hurt my heart, and to this day still bothers me, that Black men and women are picked up by technology that misidentifies and misrepresents them. Can I tell you about a lady named Portia Woodruff in Detroit who was 8 months pregnant, picked up because they thought she committed a robbery. The person in the photo was not pregnant and didn't look anything like her. She went to the police department. She almost suffered a miscarriage, and then she had to pay to get out of jail. These examples of biases show up, and more predominantly, they show up, and I'll talk about it as I close shortly, in the elections. Other areas that I want to also point out are obviously workplace surveillance, environmental concerns, the enabling of hate speech, copyright infringement. We talked about this yesterday. AI, particularly generative AI, can actually go in and remix songs. You all heard about Drake's song that was remixed, and we all got it on Spotify. We were listening to it, and we loved it, and then we found out it wasn't him, right? It can do stuff like that without honoring the creator, and then also create these new technologies that have particular implications for our elections. So let me kind of go into the elections, and then I want you all to think about some Q&A. Now, I've had some experience with the Spelman students twice. Y'all ask a lot of questions, so write them down, and I will try to get into as many as possible because I think this is a conversation that will set the rest of the day. So let me just sit here for a second. We are on the precipice of a new election, and many of you probably were voters in 2016, and some of you were not. But we actually saw the proliferation of AI in our elections, particularly more on the deep fake side. If you remember when presidential nominee Clinton was darkened, or Russian operatives and other foreign operatives circulated polling misplacements and all this stuff. You fast forward, as Dr. Alondra Nelson said yesterday in a conversation with Cecilia Rouse, that this is the AI election, because now we have it infiltrated throughout society, as I said, because it's affecting how we live, learn, and earn. The Pew Research Center says that most people in America are concerned with the spread of false information. So this is not something that's new, and I'm not gonna assume that anyone in here, even the students, don't know nothing about this. And yes, I did, I said don't know nothing, because at this point you do. The key thing is that for Black Americans and those of us across who are of the voting age, misinformation is predominant. Just take a look at these recent headlines where voters, Black voters, are being manipulated and deceived by information that they read, see on the internet. Now, I'm not gonna ask you to raise your hand, but I think all of us have been guilty. I think I've killed Smokey Robinson 2 times already, even though he has not been dead. I think my mother has shared some content that I had to tell her, Ma, you need to take that back, and she said no. But we all are part of this false information and this false diaspora and dichotomy. But let me tell you about Black Americans when it comes to the web of disinformation. It doesn't just start with a candidate's character. It actually shows up in the extremism of how we respond to extremist hate speech. It shows up in how we're categorized when it comes to the web of misinformation in terms of health skepticism and misinformation. In fact, I'll give all the students a statistic. Health misinformation is one of the highest forms of disinformation that we actually are seeing. Showed up in COVID when people thought that the pandemic and the vaccine were gonna kill them, but it shows up even more because even though we live in a society where technology can facilitate and actually help us resolve health disparities, we're still afraid of the internet and the information that it provides. And we get bad actors who tell us all this bad stuff. This chart comes from a young lady who I think you should follow her work. It's called Onyx. She's been doing some fantastic work mapping misinformation and disinformation in the election across the country. And this is one of the things she puts up that I think if you can't look at this with some kind of shade, you should. Because this is telling us that this is not one issue, but Black Americans are subjected to a web of misinformation. And while I have you, because some of us have partnership and allegiance and some DNA with our Spanish brothers and sisters, I just read this report about Spanish language disinformation. Spanish language users on the internet primarily are the highest population to use social media. Say that one more time. They go online for their news, Twitter, Facebook, Meta, you name it. Free Press just put out a report that suggested that that's where they're going to get their information. But guess what? They also are the ones, particularly Dallas Spanish speakers, who often receive disinformation and false links. So they're subjected to that too. I just actually presented before the Senate, before Congressman Lujan and Padilla, who actually are looking at Spanish misinformation and how we actually quell that. So there's allyship in how people of color are being marginalized and vulnerable in this sphere. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that we have no agency over this. As I get towards the close, there are states right now that are attempting to work towards closing the misinformation, disinformation gap. They are publishing bicultural content. They are enhancing fact-checking. They are simplifying the voter process and making sure it's multilingual. This doesn't apply to just Spanish speakers, but people from the Caribbean and Africa and other languages and dialect. My dear colleague, Chinasa Okola, will be up later talking about the limitation of language in these models. But the reason I bring this up, my friends, and I promise I'm gonna close, I said I wasn't gonna sound like a Black Baptist preacher, but I'm starting to resemble one, is that algorithmic decision-making can show up during this election in ways that facilitate gerrymandering and assist in predictive campaigning. We have not yet in Washington, D.C. come up with any policies that help us to identify algorithmic manipulated election advertisements or ads that are AI generated. And we have so many bills circulating way before this election that we've not been able to get closure in some of them that have had the cadence as well as the approval of industry. But this is the part that I want to share that I love the most about when I'm bringing AI to Black communities. But some of the reason why we have seen some of these issues come up is because the people sitting at the table look like this. You know, I was taken in 2023 by a New York Times article that suggested the modern day era of AI leaders were these folks. Take a look at them. You probably know most of them because they're in the news. One of them actually lost his job, lost it twice, came back, and then became a billionaire. Only person I know who could do that. If I lost my job, that'd have been the end, right? So I'd be like, get out, get your box, and get out the door, right? But guess what? These are the hidden figures of AI. Take a look at that photo. I'm not going to name them by names because I know their names. You should get to know them. But the issues that I'm talking about today were pressed through by my friend Sophia Noble, LaTanya Sweeney, Kathy, we're going to hear from later. So many women, Talitha, there are people who have been working in this space that look like us. And as I wrap up, I get so taken by this because they're not just computer scientists. Lisa Rice is over the National Fair Housing Alliance. Fallon Wilson, who's a Spelman alum, is running an initiative on Black churches and AI education. Of course, I'm in the middle. You know, I had to put myself somewhere in there. But my point of this slide, my friend Yvette Clark, is to show that we're unhidden because everything that people are talking about in terms of the promises and the perils started with here. You know, Katherine Johnson was a NASA astronaut, and I read that book and saw that movie, and she was 96 years old when people recognized her capacity and what she had done to stop many disasters in space. And that book came out, and I remember seeing her at the White House. She was 96. She soon died at 100. Black women don't need to die to be uncovered because you already, all of you in this room, generationally, you know what the deal is, and we're counting on you to do this work. So as I wrap up, we need more people with our experiences at the table. The Congresswoman out of the dear state of California said we don't need one seat, we need two. I was with her last week. We need public policies like the AI Equity Lab that we're developing, the workshop, real high-risk applications of criminal justice, financial services, and others. We need humans in the loop. And we also need to understand the pivotal role that technology plays in our society. And we need to know one more thing. I got a book. I got a book. Listen, I did a book talk yesterday. I'm going to come back. The key thing is we will not close the AI divide unless we close the digital divide. And too many people are still left offline, and we have to make sure that they're connected to experience the computing power of what AI will afford. So tell your kinfolk to get online because AI has come, left the station, and they need to be part of this new democracy, and they also need to be smart as they're doing it. So I will be back, Dr. Spence, to talk more about it. If you missed the book talk, I can't repeat it because I don't have more time. So I would love to, but I'm really proud. And if you look at that cover, the only thing that I would say, somebody asked me the other day, why do you call it digitally invisible? I said, because on the one part, there are a lot of digitally disconnected people in America and across the globe. And on the other part, I was invisible. And now I'm seen. So to all of you beautiful young ladies in the audience, be seen, be vigilant, be interrogators, be explainers, be lifers, and know that you can do this too. Sociologists, philosophers, ethicists, lawyers, just plain old community folks, aunties, uncles, cousins, you could do it too. Just know what it means to not allow someone to take your power and agency away. So with that, thank you, Spelman, and thank you. Oh, I think I have time for one or two questions. Oh, good, I still got questions. You know, sometimes I be struggling with that, y'all. I like to talk, you can already tell. So I do have time. There are microphones on the side. Please come on up and ask a question on AI as we get ready for the rest of this day. Okay, we got one. Come on and say, this is Spelman. I know it's early. And say your name, and I would love to hear your year.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Righteous Walton. I'm a graduating senior, computer science major, art minor from Indianapolis, Indiana, attending Spelman College. And I'm actually writing my thesis paper on ethics and AI. And I wanted to ask you, what are the ways that we can make AI more receptive to the needs that we have in the intersectionalities that are not being protected, like you mentioned?
Love it. Well, first and foremost, congratulations to you on your doctorate or your master's thesis.
Bachelor's.
Oh, you sound like a master's student. You better go to somebody's graduate school. Listen, I think the work that I try to do around intersectionality is really important, right? Because we try to think of technology in many respects as a dichotomy between, this particular characteristics, like the same way I talk about the digital divide, it's always who's online, who's not online. Well, what AI has done is challenged us. You saw that inferential economy slide I showed. Because what happens is those protected characteristics that are really clearly delineated, they are protected, but there's so many other elements of intersectionality about us. So what do? We need more people to go in and interrogate the cadence of the models. Are we looking at the various scenarios that can go right or wrong? Ruman Chowdhury, actually in DC, has been doing something called red teaming, which is breaking the model before it goes to market. Now, some would argue that that actually takes away from the time that we need innovation to flourish, which is probably true, but we need more people at the table to actually interrogate those. And I would even push you further as you're doing your work for your bachelor's, that you even come up with some critical questions that we need to be asking to address this intersectionality. The unfortunate thing is we often don't have people at the table that represent that lived experience, whether the hope or the trauma. And so the more that you can put those questions on the table, the more receptive that we'll find the AI economy be in responding to that. And I'm real confident, actually, and optimistic that we've come a long way. I've been doing this for a really long time. And in this space, I think most of us would agree, we didn't even talk about bias like 6, 7 years ago. Now we're actually talking about it, and we have people who are actually thinking about intersectionality in a very participatory way. So good luck. And I'm here. I'm on LinkedIn if you ever want to, bounce around some ideas.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Leandra Hall. I'm also a senior computer science major here at Spelman. I know that you mentioned in one of your slides talking about how to combat disinformation online, to use AI to combat misinformation. But I know we probably have all seen, whether it's ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, producing, when you ask a prompt, generating a wrong answer. So I kind of want to know, how would we use, for example, generative AI in that way where if it can produce misinformation, how can we use it to combat misinformation?
So I've long struggled with this concept of using AI to quell anything that's biased. I mean, people will tell you at different companies I've sat in on, I'm like, nah, I'm not buying that, I'm not buying that. But I do think we've actually come a long way where we can actually program it to pick up some keywords or content streams that may help us to identify some of the more visible language structures that really elicit hate speech or are deceiving. Some of the state attorney generals have actually put together what is so incredible, right, in a state. Misinformation teams that are doing some fact checking. I've been in several of those meetings where they're like, well, we've got people who are skilled in this that are helping us to develop this. Dr. Alondra Nelson yesterday talked about some research that she's doing where they're looking at AI and chatbots during the election and working with state AGs. The pivotal thing is you've got to have people at the table who understand this. One of the things that we're doing with the Equity Lab is similar. From the standpoint at Brookings, we're bringing together people, for example, in healthcare, who work in healthcare, who understand patient advocacy, who know what it's like to do insurance, and we're putting them alongside technologists so that they can co-create together and we can come up with policy solutions that make sense for the industry, for the patient, for the community, the society. But it's hard, right? Because to your point, that's what I love about the Onyx work. What she's trying to do is develop, I think, a structural model for computer scientists to sort of tap into so they can help in feeding these models. And let me just say one more thing, which I think is also exciting about this time, and I didn't mention it in my presentation. There are a lot of diverse founders that are getting into the space now that are really taking this, bull by the horn and saying, my friend John Passmore out of New York just developed what he's considering to be the Black Chat GPT, where they're actually trying to program it with our experiences. So to your point, we're not using AI to overcorrect for trauma. You understand what I'm saying? So we're actually going forward and being much more proactive in using AI because it can represent our unique experiences. So to your point, I mean, long-windedly, it's not going to be 100% perfect, you know, because these systems, you know, I tell people all the time, folks try to think of AI as like this, you know, thing in a vacuum that's being created in some lab. Ultimately, the mouse comes out the lab, okay? And it gets applied in a context. And when it gets applied into a context, it actually has human consequence. And when it has human consequence, sometimes you can correct it, or sometimes you're like Portia Woodruff going into your savings trying to expunge your record. And it's important for us to get some of these things right, or for some of you who want to go into policy making, advise policymakers for some of the better practices to sort of use these technologies in ways that make sense. So, computer scientists, I am counting on you to come in, because I don't know how I said all that, because I am not a CS major, but I hang around a lot of computer and data scientists as a sociologist, which would be my other point to all of you. You don't have to be a scientist to know this. You just have an intuitive compassion to want to be able to solve these problems. And that's the beauty of intellectualism, because you can go into spaces where you may not know a lot, but you have a driving conviction to at least be part of the conversation. You know, I was growing up, my mom used to say, you ain't gotta say something all the time. Stop talking all the time. Now I talk all the time and I'm okay with it, right? Because somewhere along the line, somebody will be impacted, whether it's a company or it's an individual. So keep doing what you're doing. We're very proud of you.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome. So with that, enjoy the rest of the conference. I unfortunately won't be able to stick around too long, but you all know how to get in touch with me. Dr. Spence knows how to get in touch with me, and hopefully she'll have me back, and I can come speak to all of you. But I love y'all, Spelman. Thank you.
So I want us all to give Nicol Turner-Lee a huge hand. Thank you, Nicol, for that excellent, excellent presentation. And welcome, everybody. Welcome to all of you who are here with us and everybody else who is joining us online. I'm so glad you're here. We have a great panel lined up for us today, this morning, to talk about mostly the perils of AI, but we're going to talk about a little bit more than that. So first of all, I want to make sure that you all know that we could not have done this programming without the huge help and invitation of our Spelman colleagues. So I want to thank Dr. Helene Gayle, Provost Scott Johnson, and Director Spence for all their work and the work of their teams in putting this on. Good. So I want to tell you a little bit about Brookings before we get started, because you're here, and want to make sure that you know that after this is all over, I am certainly available to help to chat with you about Brookings. So Brookings, as our president, Dr. Rouse, mentioned, is the #1 think tank in the world. So what is a think tank? We are a policy research organization that is very, very influential in all areas of government. So at the global level, at the federal level, state level, and the municipal level. We have 5 programs: foreign policy, economic studies, governance studies, which is like political science, our metropolitan program, and global and economic development. So each of those runs as a department, and they have, each has about 50 experts. So we really span the globe, we span a variety of topics, and we do a lot of interdisciplinary work. This programming here is our interdisciplinary work on AI and emerging technologies. So if you're interested in finding out more about Brookings, finding out more about public policy career, feel free to speak to me afterwards or any of my colleagues here from Brookings. So I just want you to know we're really open to that. We're really, really thrilled to be here at Spelman with such impressive women and really want to make sure that you know what those opportunities are and that you know that you're very welcome at Brookings. So with that, I'm going to start this panel by introducing my colleagues here. So immediately to my left is Valerie Wirtschafter, who is a fellow in foreign policy and also our AIET, so Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technologies Initiative. We also have, at Brookings, we have Molly Kinder, who is a fellow in our Metro program. And then we have a Spelman's very own here. So Dr. Raquel Hill, who's the chair of the Computer Science Department. And then we have Kathy Power from University of New Mexico, who is an associate professor in Africana Studies and also in the political science department there. So I want to welcome them all, and today we're going to have a really, really interesting discussion. So this is really about elections. So this is our Election 2024 event, and so we're going to start off talking about AI and elections. But before we do that, I want to ask, who is planning to vote? All right. That is great. I'm thrilled to see that. So we're going to start off by talking about elections. And so Val, I'm going to start with you. So Val has done a lot of work on elections. And I first want to ask you a little bit about, you know, we are going to talk about the perils of AI, but we also want to know, so what are the positive ways in which AI is actually being used in elections? And then I want you to talk a little about your work and what you found.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. This is a really wonderful, has been a really wonderful event, and I'm looking forward to all the panels. So first to the positive cases, and I think Nicole hit on some of these brilliantly. But you know, generative AI in particular, the translation capabilities, being able to reach people in a language that they're more comfortable in accessing authoritative information. One of the solutions that I know Dr. Nelson talked about, that I'll also talk about, that, you know, maybe, you know, the thing to hammer home is seeking out authoritative information in this age of, you know, where content can be just generated out of a prompt of whatever you want. And so being able to find that information in a language that you're comfortable in, I think is huge. Being able to translate campaign materials to better communicate is huge. All of these potentials, I think, are really valuable. Another area, and I think, you know, we talk a lot about generative AI, is productivity enhancing, sort of, you know, whether it's your co-pilot or your assistant, or whether it's you know, eventually going to be a really smart colleague. Being able to use that to your advantage responsibly, but use it as that productivity enhancing tool to close the gaps, maybe financially, between campaigns or with local news. A lot of the challenges of authoritative information are that local news is dying around this country, that outlets are closing, that there's maybe one or two people working in a local newsroom. And so this is a way to help give a little bit more capacity. The third example, or positive, I'll say, is, you know, maybe not in a US context, but in other contexts, you know, we see it as a way, especially in authoritarian cases. So Belarus is an example, a very not free country where elections are completely tilted. You know, we saw an opposition candidate actually using generative AI to get out there. And Dr. Nelson was talking a little bit about this yesterday also in Pakistan, but we saw it in Belarus in a way to avoid some of the legal jeopardy that comes with campaigning, but still being able to share ideas. So I think those are some positives, and there's of course others, and we'll talk a lot about some of the perils too. And then in my own research, you know, we've heard, especially for the past year, but really since the launch of ChatGPT, this kind of drumbeat of the tsunami's coming, the disinformation tsunami's coming, watch out for it. It's going to take over. We're not going to be able to discover what's true anymore. It's all going to be fabricated. And so, you know, part of what I've been doing in my research is really trying to quantify the scope of this challenge, because I think that there are, you know, we don't want to understate the scope of the challenge, but we also don't want to overstate it, because there are risks that come with that too. You know, not being able to just dismiss true information because we don't like it, right? We saw this with the Detroit rally, Kamala Harris's rally. Oh, that crowd size is AI generated. And so, you know, we want to be careful and balanced in the approach so that we're not casting doubt about on information writ large, because for a democracy, an informed public is fundamental. And so I think that is something I've really been thinking about, is this kind of level setting and getting a real handle on where we are actually seeing this. And so to quickly wrap up, where we are seeing it, we've seen it in some concerning cases, the New Hampshire robocall. We've seen it in some really weird, it's shown up in very bizarre ways, sort of very unbelievable, silly, kind of comical, easily sort of written off as AI generated. And I think that those are the vast majority of what we've seen thus far, but I think we're getting to this point in the elections, and this is really what I'm paying attention to now, where, the truth of information may not necessarily matter, especially in a post-election period when people are, when tensions are heightened, when the political realities set in. I think that there's a huge potential for generative AI to show up there. And then we're also getting to a point, and this is, we're in Georgia. Georgia's a pivotal state. AI is most impactful when it's hyper-targeted. And so when elections hinge on smaller, the way the vote goes in smaller capacities, whether it's at the local level, being able to clone a voice of a local representative, a trusted figure in the community, is much more impactful than cloning Joe Biden's voice with a robocall. We know what Joe Biden sounds like. We don't necessarily know what that local level figure sounds like, or the sort of day of election targeting to get you to not show up to the poll, or things like that. And so I think those are really still on the horizon and things to be paying attention to for sure.
Great, thanks for that. And also, I think there have been some scandals where AI-generated phone calls have said people are not registered. You're not properly registered,
Yes.
et cetera. And that's showing up a lot, particularly in communities of color.
Yes, or to demobilize voters, to sow confusion in a very targeted way.
Right, exactly. Thanks very much for that, Val. So, Kathy, we're going to stick on the theme of elections. I know you've done a lot of work on the use of AI in administering elections. So I want you to talk a little bit about that and tell us what, obviously it's being used to administer elections, and that seems relatively positive, but clearly whenever you think something's innocuous, there's also another side. So tell us a little about that.
Sure, and I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. We have to have some context here, politically, nationally, and globally. We're in a global moment where over 50% of the world is hosting national elections. 47 out of 70 countries out of 193 are hosting some kind of national election. And the US presidential election is happening in that time. People are voting from the lowest level, the village, the county level, to the national level. International organizations like the European Union are hosting parliamentary elections, and all of them, or I should say there's variation in use of AI at all, and how, and its impact. And so this is a global moment where we have more elections than ever, and we have more use of AI than ever. And we have to understand the consequences of it and the two sides of it. Valerie and I don't know each other. We were like, we're doing two sides of the same coin, where the disinformation, misinformation, and cybersecurity is hitting voters. And I come in on the side of, who has the power to decide? Who has the power to decide? And how do we decide? What is important about AI and elections is the tools and technologies. We vote just by raising our hands sometimes, right? So what is the use and advantage of technology beyond that, and how can that actually compromise the process and actually hurt us as well? So why do we use AI in election management, and what is election management? It's something we really don't think about, right? Who makes the ballot that you use? Who counts the votes? Who maintains the voter registration list? These are human tasks. We used to have boxes, right? We count the pieces of paper. And now ballot counting is, AI is used to count ballots. Who makes the technology that is used? And what kind of power does that give over the elections process? Is it that the algorithm that is designed to count votes is made by someone in the government? or is it delegated, outsourced to a corporation? Which often happens, and thank you, Dr. Turner, for talking about criminal justice, because in New Mexico, whether or not you're paroled is heavily decided by an algorithm that takes into account in your neighborhood recidivism. How many people have been arrested, incarcerated, they come back, they're arrested, incarcerated again, and even if you're a model incarcerated person, you could be denied parole because of that percentage of recidivism, okay? So what is the utility of AI in elections? It's efficiency, it's accuracy, it's accountability. We can use them to count votes. We can use AI to translate ballots into multiple languages, for example, so the inclusivity, that people understand who they're voting for, what issues they are voting for. We can address mail-in, people who mail in their ballots, early voting, for example, election day voting and counting as it's happening, and then for auditing and verification at the end. In Venezuela, in the recent election, they had pictures of each candidate on the ballot, so that if you didn't know the person's name for whom you wanted to vote, at least you could see what they look like. Okay, so how can this go wrong? Right? The leading candidate had 13 pictures of himself and one of everyone else, right? And so how do you interpret that? Some people would say that's a mistake, right? But in the Venezuelan context, that was power. So people said, if you have the power to put your picture on 13 times and no one else can, I'm voting for you because you'll make sure I eat and I have a job. And so the context of AI matters so much. In the European Union, you have people who are voting on the ground for parliamentary positions, so you're voting for someone who's representing you in an international organization. How is your vote counted? And how does it matter? On the downside of AI in elections, in managing voter calls or voter registration rolls, we had a case in Cincinnati where 50,000 people were just removed. And it was because they were mistakenly identified as people who had a record as a felon. So now they're disenfranchised as voters. And did they know why? And that's part of the problem with AI that Nicole and I were talking about. When you are harmed, it's not like when you are physically tortured and the integrity of the body, and 9 times out of 10, you would at least understand that's happening. As much as AI solves problems, it can also harm you in multiple ways all day, and you have no idea. And so how do you know that the reason why you didn't get medication was some algorithm? This happened to my daughter who had an asthma attack and was denied medication, and it was life-threatening, and she was hospitalized for the first time. And the way the algorithm interpreted it was, she went so long without hospitalization, she doesn't need the medicine. But the medicine was keeping her out of the hospital. So understanding the logic through which some human being designs an algorithm that tells this machine to make a particular decision based on certain factors. In elections management, when we have questions about whether or not these ballots were counted correctly, who had the power to create the algorithm that counts the ballots? And even if you're checking, do you understand the logic? Oftentimes in the life cycle, the design portion, the life cycle of an algorithm, there's oftentimes in NDA, these clauses where you cannot reveal the design of the algorithm because it infringes on the property rights of the corporation that made it. So I've consulted the New Mexico State Legislature on this, and it's the state of New Mexico is buying algorithms from companies to solve problems, which many states do. But oftentimes, they sign these agreements to protect the property rights of the company, and you don't know what the factors are that go into making that decision. So in terms of trying to address some of these problems, how might we think about transparency? I sat before the New Mexico State legislature, and the legislators asked very directly, give us the words to put in the legislation that help us to regulate, govern, or ensure transparency in some way. And some of my colleagues were affiliated with the Santa Fe Institute's interdisciplinary working group on algorithmic justice, who actually consulted on writing the first bill in New Mexico. So to come back to, and I'll stop here, I think I should, on elections management, is that you should understand in this election, especially in the state that you are in, who has the power to decide if algorithms should be used, how they're being used, and their positive and negative impacts. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kathy. So this reminds me when I was in graduate school, we had a number of, I had a number of peers who were had actually been sent to study, get their PhDs, but they were from Mexico. And at the time, they were really into all the mathematics and statistics and everything else in the program. And the reason for that is they actually worked for the Electoral Commission in Mexico. And they actually were hired, they were actually employees of the most dominant political party at the time. So it kind of gives you an idea of how this can be used. So thank you for that. I really, really appreciate that. So I want you to reflect a little bit on what we've talked a little bit about here, what Dr. Turner-Lee has talked about, and how AI is being used in elections, misinformation, disinformation, information, how it's used to administer elections, and how it can also be misused to administer elections. And I want you to come up with some questions. And while you're doing that, we're going to switch a little bit and talk a little bit about the use of generative AI. Most of this is about generative AI. Talk about generative AI in the workforce. And so here, the reason we want to chat about this is that, everybody is part of the workforce. All of you, if you're working now, you're part of the workforce. If you're going out after you graduate, you're part of the workforce. And AI is increasingly being used in all sorts of sectors. So it's not just the tech sector, but it's used throughout a number of sectors. And so it's important to understand what impact is that having on the shape of the workforce, and who's it impacting positively, who's it impacting negatively, and sort of what should we be thinking about when we are in the workforce and AI is being used. So for that, I'm going to turn to my colleague Molly here, and I want you to chat with us a little bit about the use of AI, generative AI, in the workforce, a little bit about what you found, just to start and kick off the conversation. And I know there are going to be a lot of questions, so I'm turning things over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Camille. Well, first, it's such a pleasure to be here at Spelman for my very first time. My son's third grade teacher last year went to Howard and got his class wildly fired up about Howard. And when I told Harry I was coming to Spelman, I said, Harry, please don't take this personally. I'm going to the #1 HBCU. So when I had this opportunity to come to speak on this panel, I leapt at it because my research at Brookings looks at the ways ChatGPT and other generative AI technology is impacting work and workers, and importantly, what can we do to make sure workers benefit and avoid harms? And based on my research, when I look at this room of Spelman students, I'm hard-pressed to think of a room that has more at stake in the future of this technology at work, and importantly, more unique opportunities to shape that future than Spelman students. And there's 5 reasons for this. I came to this with 4, but after spending time on campus yesterday, I've added a 5th. So here are my 4 reasons based on my research why I think Spelman students have so much at stake and what that says about this technology and who's being impacted. The first is along education. So our data, and I'm going to point to my colleague Mark Muro, who you're going to hear on our second panel. We've been doing a lot of this research together. We have some really interesting data from OpenAI looking at every occupation across the economy, every task that comprises those occupations. And we have data from OpenAI that makes ChatGPT on the exposure to this technology. how likely is it that this technology could change those jobs, save time with these jobs, and what is the automation risk? One of the really interesting findings is along education, and again reflects the folks in this room. This is a technology that excels at cognitive tasks, which means that the biggest group of workers who will be impacted, that will be in the types of jobs that stand to change, are those with a BA. And so when we're thinking about the types of careers that are going to be exposed to this technology, for good or for bad, so there's good and bad in this, it is professional jobs. It could be law, finance, business, marketing, the creative arts, the social sciences, STEM fields. So it's actually workers who have a BA that stand to be the most affected when it comes to the types of jobs that will change. I don't want to steal the thunder of the second panel, which is on the opportunities of generative AI. There's a lot of excitement in the fact that these knowledge jobs could change. There's opportunities for greater efficiency, productivity, to be more creative. This is not all a bad news story, but there is also definitely some risk. These occupations stand to change the most, and sometimes the skills that are going to be in demand will change. And it's really those with the BA that is what Mark and I found is the group that has the greatest at stake. Second is gender, and this is one that I'm very passionate about, but yet is not something that's really being talked about. It goes against, I think, our societal grain. Typically, when people think about technology automating work or changing work, we tend to think of a man, probably in a hard hat or some kind of blue-collar job. In part because I think the impact of automation on the manufacturing sector has had such negative consequences. Our research finds it's actually women who are overexposed based on the kinds of jobs they do to this technology. And also at greater risk of automation. And there's actually a good news story embedded in this, and I purposely chose to do gender second. It's because women like you are kicking butt when it comes to education. Women now outnumber men as holders of bachelor's degrees. So it is that accomplishment that ironically puts women at greater risk of exposure to this technology, because it is this achievement of going into higher educated jobs that comes with this exposure to this technology. And again, there's huge opportunities. It means that to the extent there are gains to be had in the workplace by using this technology, women have the most to gain. And to the extent there are risks associated with this technology, including job loss, women have the most to lose. And there's an interesting wrinkle. There's some data that I'm just fascinated by that has just come out of Denmark and India that suggests that women are leaving real opportunity on the table right now with this technology. There's a fascinating study that came out of Denmark, and it's because of the way that they have data availability, so Denmark proved to be the best case to do this study, that found that even within the same occupations, within teachers or within computer programmers, women right now are far less likely, it's like 20 percentage points or something really significant, much less likely to be active users of ChatGPT and new generative AI technology, less likely to be paying for the $20 subscription. Similarly, in Indian universities, they're finding that women in university settings are more reluctant to use it in the educational context. I think it's because we're kind of rule-abiding. We're not really sure if we're supposed to yet. But I do think this is a danger, and this is a call to action for women in this room. We can't leave this on the table. There are real opportunities with this technology, and we do risk being left behind. The third dimension that I'm very interested in my research is age and young people. Young people, particularly those just starting their careers, which is many of you in the next few years. And researchers right now are really still trying to figure out what is this going to mean for young workers. There's a sort of growing consensus with some academic evidence that's hopeful. It's pointing to what we're calling a leveling up potential, which there's been a handful of experiments, this is very promising, in lots of different types of workplaces, from call centers to computer programming to elite consulting firms, that found that inexperienced workers got the biggest productivity and performance boost for this technology. So there's a real hope that this is almost going to be like a co-pilot. It's going to help boost new workers and sort of have a faster elevator up. I'm concerned because in my qualitative research, talking to a lot of workers and executives in a lot of different fields, and some of the data I'm looking at In some instances, it actually might be the opposite. And I'm in the middle of writing a thought piece for Bloomberg on this, the concern that actually in some cases this technology is best at doing the kind of entry-level professional work that young people starting out their professional careers often do. And so there is this big question. I think young people in surveys, there's some surveys that suggest young people are more likely to use this technology, but they're also the most worried that their jobs are at risk. So I think this question of, as you start your careers, generative AI is likely to have an impact, and you have the most at stake. Fourth, and I promise I'm wrapping up, fourth is on race. We don't yet have any clear sense of how ChatGPT and generative AI will or not, there's no evidence yet of how it's going to exacerbate or not some of the concerns that Nicol Turner-Lee so eloquently talked about in terms of not job quantity, but job quality, with things like bias, algorithmic management, surveillance, the kinds of concerns we have about the way AI before ChatGPT was hurting people on the workforce because it was forcing them to go faster, or setting schedules in ways that are unpredictable, or stripping people of their agency on the job. We don't yet have a clear read on how new technologies like ChatGPT will change that, but if it looks anything like past AI technologies, it's really concerning, particularly around race. I just reviewed a new paper that's about to come out with some compelling survey data looking at algorithmic management and surveillance at work, and it was Black workers more than any other group that suffered the worst harms on that front. So it's something that we have to be paying close attention to that I think really is risk with this new technology. Here's my hopeful point. The fifth point, which I didn't have coming in because I hadn't yet met Spelman students, but after talking with Dr. Spence yesterday and meeting so many students, I feel very hopeful by this room because I've just laid out the ways on an individual level. Spelman graduates, as you're entering the workforce, you might individually find that this technology could influence the future of your work. You also live in a society where this is going to have profound impacts across society when it comes to work. It is likely to have profound impacts on inequality in ways that we don't fully know, but we can likely anticipate. And Spelman students are not just worried about themselves, you are asking the big probing questions on society. Technology is not destiny. How this plays out depends on the guardrails we decide we want to put in place, the regulations we put in place, our expectations on society, whether we have agency as workers to shape this. And that is a societal conversation. And I've been blown away by the Spelman students who are sociologists or asking questions, probing questions in your thesis. I hope it is you ladies who are going to ask these really big, deep questions and are going to make sure that we are shaping the future of this technology in ways that will be beneficial to workers, lower inequality, and that workers really benefit from the productivity gains.
Thanks very much, Molly. So we're going to go to Spelman's own, and I'm so thrilled you're here. Thank you very much, Dr. Raquel Hill. So I want to maybe start off jumping off a point that Molly made. So around what are the impacts, inequality impacts of generative AI? And I want to ask the question in this way because I know you've been thinking a lot about this. So first of all, I want our audience to understand, how is it that bias can be introduced into generative AI applications? So maybe we'll start there. And then I want to ask you a follow-on question about the use of AI by corporations and how that's being used and what are some of the things that you're seeing there. But maybe you can start off by talking about how bias is introduced into the...
Good morning, and thank you for having me. I think that we have to, we hear the conversation about, AI being biased, the models being biased, about there being bias in data. And I think that we have to dissect, that a little bit. When we think about ourselves as human beings, we are inherently biased. If there is research that we conduct and there are biased findings in that, when I say biased, I mean that maybe the findings are negative. Just think about, how that is actually received. We understand that the psychology of how our brain processes negative information is different than positive information. So it's kind of like we more freely accept something that is negative. And so imagine then findings that are negative, and those findings being included in a model that makes an automatic decision about something. So these models are gleaning information and knowledge. And if that knowledge is based on a finding that was negative, the finding may have been true for the question that was being asked. But how then is that finding being applied automatically by an algorithm that is trying to find some statistical relationship based on this negative information? And so it goes back to the human. So if we don't have a diverse set of individuals that are making decisions about how information is being used, what information should be included, then we are leaving that process to an algorithm that is only looking at the statistical properties of data. It has removed human evaluation from the decision-making process. And so we get negative in, we have negative out. We get bias in, we have bias out. So you probably heard the bias in bad data or inaccurate data, and this is why we get to this point where we have all this negative information, right? And I think that we all have to have a seat at the table when these conversations are being had so that there is oversight to the algorithm and the decision is not just left to the computation. Because this is all about statistics. It's not about the human. It's all about mathematical relationships and not about personal relationships. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face when it comes to bias. We have to take it back to us and how we process information and understand that though we are inherently biased as humans, we need to have oversight when it comes to the decisions that are being made or the recommendations that are being made by the systems that we are created.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that explanation. I think that's really, it's a helpful building block as we're going to talking about other elements of the use of generative AI in the rest of this conversation. But I also want to just pick up on the topic of AI in the workforce. And companies are clearly using AI in every sector and a variety of different business processes. And if you're someone who's thinking about working with AI as part of your career, part of your professional development, like a lot of our audience members here, what are some of the elements that you need to be thinking about to be an informed user of AI in the workplace?
And so I'm glad you say an informed user. So I think about this. I'm an educator. From my heart, that's who I am. I'm a researcher too, but I'm also an educator. And I think about this challenge of providing opportunity to all of Spelman's students. And what I need for our students to understand that you can be a consumer of technology, but you want to be able to move beyond, just consuming the technology. You don't necessarily have to be a computer scientist, but you must be an expert within your domain. Because if you're relying on technology that may be inherently biased based on the data that it's trained on, you need to have expertise within your domain so that you can assess the accuracy of the information that is generated by the algorithm. So, at a baseline, when you're thinking about using this technology, you should understand that you must be an expert in your domain, because whatever query that you present is going to provide you with some information that you cannot accept as being 100% accurate. It may provide you with a foundation, but then you have to take that information and conduct your own research in order to assess it. And so I think that's the first part. This is my message to the students. So now let's talk about, companies and organizations that are looking to use this technology to improve productivity. And I think it automates some of the foundational work that you need to do to begin to solve a problem. It'll give you a building block, a starting point, and that may accelerate the process for, generating a solution for the problem. But companies are also presented with the same challenges that students are when they are trying to accelerate the process for, generating a solution for a problem. The same way which you have errors that are introduced in data, the same thing could happen with companies. So let's say I'm a computer scientist, so I'm going to give you a computer science example. So let's say, and we're talking about voting, so let's talk about electronic voting machines. Let's say we have a company that's, creating the next generation of electronic voting machines. And it is assisted by AI technology. So what happens if, for example, the the data that the large language model that's going to produce the, version A of the base software is full of bugs, errors in the code, right? And we have someone that may be entry level that's prompting it to actually generate this code. And so now this person may or may not be skilled enough to assess that, there are some buffer overflows, vulnerabilities in this code. A buffer overflow means that I've allotted so much space to store some information, but I don't check the capacity to store information that I receive. So I just write it without any regard, and I overflow the buffer that could impact the next instruction that is executed by the computer when I'm running this code, right? So buffer overflow is a common vulnerability that is exploited in cyber attacks. So it is possible then, by using this technology, if I get code that has possible vulnerabilities and bugs that can be exploited, then that becomes the base for my solution for the next generation of voting software. Is this possible? Very probable, because for every 10 lines of code that is written by even skilled computer scientists and software developers, there's at least one bug. And now this software is usually millions of lines of code. So the same thing that we're having with, biased data and negative findings, and the fact that that can impact policy, companies can have the same challenge when they're generating software solutions. And so I talked about, this being a problem with voting machines, and the impact it could have on elections. But if we look at some of the cybersecurity attacks that have happened recently that were on major corporations who were software suppliers for the world, for governmental organizations, this could possibly create a supply chain issue for companies who are creating this software. And so when you have a supply chain issue, I only have to affect one individual or one organization, and it spreads out to the world. And this becomes a very challenging problem to identify and then remediate. And so I think as companies think about this as a productivity booster. They should also consider the harms. They should put checks and balances in place in order to ensure that, you know, as we are using these tools, that there are checks and balances in place in order to address some of these issues.
Great, thanks very much for that, Raquel. So this is we have such a great panel, really deep experts. And I know we've been talking a lot and had a lot of information that we've been discussing here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to break up the flow a little bit, and I'm going to ask our Spelman audience to come up with some questions. So we've now heard about misinformation and disinformation and the use of AI in information, like in just informing us. We've also heard about the use of AI in administering elections and maybe some precautions around that. We've also heard about the way AI is being used in the workforce and maybe some early findings that show that women and people with BAs are likely to be most impacted, at least at the early stages of our understanding of how AI is going to be used in the workforce. And then finally, we've talked a little bit about how bias can be introduced into these models, and also some of the ways in which when you know, the code is developed, you can get errors, and those errors can compound over a value chain, over a supply chain. So that's what we've talked about so far. And so I want to get a couple of questions, and then I'm going to move into a second round of discussion. So please say your name, your year, and where you're from, and your question. Okay. It's on. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sheridan Lyles. I'm a junior psychology major with a concentration in mental health and public health minor here at Spelman. I had a question due to some conversations I've had with some of my faculty members surrounding how we should expect to have some type of proficiency in AI as we move on to working careers. As companies are looking for employees to have this experience, how do you expect that change to be implemented over time? And as educators, what do you think should change in curriculum at the college and high school levels to try to address those issues?
Great. Thank you. Go ahead. Whoever wants to answer.
Oh, I can start. I can talk about some of the things that we are doing in the computer science department at Spelman. I think one of the great things that Spelman does, it requires digital literacy for all students on campus. And so in the digital literacy courses that we're offering, like the students here would know this, it's like 105 is the digital literacy for non-STEM students. There is an AI module in that digital literacy course, and we're building that out even more to talk about large language models, the use of those, the need for understanding, and the ability to assess what is actually given to you from a large language model. I think that is very important for students to understand that, especially about the relationship with the data and how those models actually work and what is produced. For our digital literacy course for our STEM majors, which focuses more on programming, as we build out, as they build a skill, the foundation for using a language to solve a problem, we can now present them with more complex problems where we can integrate the use of the technology in order to assist in developing those solutions for problems that without the assistance they would not be able to complete. But the importance is that they begin with learning the foundation first, because as I stated, you need to have the skill set to be able to assess the accuracy of what is being presented. Without the foundational skills, you will not be able to do that. And so that's what we're doing in the Department of Computer Science here at Spelman, and I can imagine that other places are doing the same thing. We also have partnerships with K through 12, and so as we are developing curriculum for the students at Spelman, we're also determining how best to present those to our K through 12 partners and our engagement with them.
Thanks, Raquel. Molly?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, and my view is that so many different occupations are going to change and evolve to adapt to work with this technology. But the important thing to recognize is when we say mental health is a great example, and I'll get into that specific example, it's not asking you to become a programmer. Generative AI technology is user-friendly. It's using your own, it's using human language, not computer language. It's a very user-friendly tool. It's also a general purpose technology, which is a big fancy word, but it basically means it's like the internet, meaning the inventors of the internet had no idea all the ways it was going to be used in our lives. When they invented the iPhone, there wasn't a sense of exactly every way we were going to use this. Google does not know OpenAI does not know how the mental health space is going to adapt to use this. It's going to be up to us to get in there and play with this technology and figure it out. And the best thing you can do, it's not that everyone should have a second degree in understanding the kind of background of how to program these machines. It's how do you use it? You are going to be the expert. If you're passionate about mental health, my number one piece of advice to you is jump in, read about the ways it's being used in mental health, and experiment with it. I'm fascinated by this because we have a mental health crisis in this world, and we do not have enough therapists. We also don't have enough insurance. I mean, my son is in therapy. I pay out of pocket. It's extraordinarily expensive. It's even hard to get into a therapist. ChatGPT is extraordinarily empathetic. If you haven't used it, use it, talk to it. I mean, I listened to a fascinating podcast, I think it was The Economist, with a woman who has a startup on mental health and has lots of guardrails. It's not meant to replace the therapist. But oftentimes people are in crisis late at night, not when they have their therapy appointment. There are ways this can meet people where they are, very empathetically with a lot of guardrails. I think it could be a force for good. If I was majoring in mental health right now, I would be experimenting with this. I would be reading about the most cutting edge use cases of it. I'd be worried about the ways it could go wrong and getting really smart about that. No matter your major, you as the person who's curious, just starting out, your advantage is you'll know that space more than the person creating this technology. So it's all about you getting in there and learning the best cases of it. Your value add to an employer is someone who's going to show up with curiosity, a willingness to experiment, who's going to be a first mover. Employers expect young people to be first movers and experimenting. The best employers are not going to come down in a top-down way and say, this is how to use it. They're going to empower their workforce to tell them how to use it. So that would be my piece of advice. I think there are certain sectors where actually hard tech skills are going to be useful, like in surprising in finance and in advertising. I've talked to a lot of employers that say, you don't just need to be creative, you're going to actually have to have some tech skills. So I think in certain places that's useful. But I would just say starting out with curiosity and becoming familiar with it is the most important thing you can do.
Thanks very much, Molly. I'm going to take some more questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great question. I'm going to move over here, and then I'm going over there, and then back. So please say your name, your year, and where you're from.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jalea McIntosh. I'm a junior sociology major from St. Louis, Missouri. It's actually my first year at Spelman, but I'm very grateful to be here. So my question was kind of building off of this piece of empathy and humanism that seems to be diluted in the AI process and the algorithms. Do you guys believe, especially when it comes to education and how you set the visual assessment piece, that that humanism piece and the exceptions to rules can exist within algorithms in the future?
So I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Raquel.
Okay. All right. That's a tough question. Like, can we encode humanism in the algorithm? I think, ooh, that's challenging, right? Because, well, and I'll explain to you why I say that is challenging. It's often hard for even humans to embody humanism. And so we will be asking humans. I mean, your question asked of an automated system to be more human than the human is able to be. And so I think what the hope is that as there are more people engaged, in developing these systems, more people with diverse experiences, diverse lived experiences engaged, and from all backgrounds, then we could get there. But without that, without there being some consideration for the other and the lived experience of others, we will not get there. And so it's important, for everybody in the room to be represented from all backgrounds so that we can have that diversity of thought and lived experience and the appreciation of those lived experience before we can get there.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Yep.
Good morning. My name is Sky Hunt. I'm a junior environmental studies major here at Spelman, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. My question is kind of similar to what was just asked, but I guess it gets a little bit more specific. I'm curious about if there's a larger debate going on about what the goal of AI is, and if it's to move towards or away from the human, and what those two sides might look like, and maybe what the more real and truer middle ground might look like as it's applied to everyday life.
Val?
I think it's a huge debate. We've seen it especially playing out in education, in contexts where maybe, rural contexts potentially, where it's hard to get teachers or where it's hard to get doctors in the health field. And so can we use some of these tools to fill those gaps? And I think that's an interesting impulse because it does give people access to care or access to types of systems that maybe they didn't have before, or that maybe, didn't have this sort of body of data that pulled from everything that existed on the internet in the past. But the concern there is that you're going to end up in this world where, sort of replicating, I think, to Nicol's point, the entire thrust of her book is that you're going to wind up in a world where some people get these systems and some people get these systems plus the humans. And so I think that is a huge challenge that we have to think about as we continue to roll out different types of tools for different types of sectors. I think about it really in the education space, in the healthcare space, but I suspect everyone here can think of an example across any profession where that type of divide can become exacerbated and sort of get imprinted on society again, and then we're back to square one where these aren't lifting people up, they're actually replicating some of those divisions again.
But I think also the other thing to remember is that that sort of trajectory just doesn't happen. We can intercede, we can be part of the process, we can be the ones who are directing what the next, the next technology is going to be, how this technology is being used. We're the ones who are going to be figuring out what kind of data is in there. So we are the ones that really can break some of the cycles around bias and inequality and, in fact, just the disequilibrium of technology more generally. So I think we have a responsibility, and we also have an opportunity.
If I can weigh in really quickly, the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico is asking these sorts of questions. And it's about the relationship between humanity and technology and artificial intelligence. And in decision-making in particular, we ask questions like, are we trying to correct human decision-making or improve it, and in that way AI is a decision-making aid? Are we trying to approximate human decision-making? And there are experiments going on 2-year-olds, because that's when you amass the most amount of information. Can we train AI to accumulate or draw on information in the same way? And then third, can we surpass human decision-making? And what does that look like? Those questions are being asked right now. And so for you, and I'm sorry, the last question, how do we do it in a humane way? And why would we want to surpass human decision-making, and for what purpose? You can imagine computation, lots of information that humans can't, but also should there be some guardrails on that, and who has the power to make that decision?
Great, thanks very much. So how would humans know what it means to surpass human decision-making?
Exactly.
Okay.
And willing to admit it.
Yeah. So I'm going to go over here, and then we have another person behind you. I'm going to take those, and then I'm going to come back to the panel. Go ahead.
Well, this is totally fascinating. So, hello everyone. I'm Laurel Yancey. I'm an attorney. You know, there's been discussion about, you know, bias being built into these models and these systems. Can you kind of address how auditing may, you know, help with all of this, the discovery and the correction? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Lauren. And then why don't ask your question, and then I'll come back to the panel.
Hi, my name is Gianna Gwynn. I am a senior computer science major at Spelman College. My question is, when you're talking about the importance of having people of diverse lived experiences, how do you hold each other accountable for promoting societal change? Especially when there are times where people might be still trying to maintain those power structures that are causing the harm.
Okay, two great questions. So the first one is auditing, basically, and bug checking, and you know, that sort of thing, more technical question. So I'm going to let you handle that. The second one is really more generally, like, how do we make sure, as we're developing any technology, you know, this technology is one of them, but how do we hold each other accountable, and how do we break the power structure? So Molly, you'll take that, and then, so Raquel, I'm going to go to you first.
Okay. All right. So we can talk about the whole auditing process, and I think
maybe not in immense detail, but
I'm not going to talk about it in immense detail. But to think about it, you know, the one question is like, would I have the system to audit itself? And I think not, right? I think that there needs to be, you know, humans in the loop, and that's why I stress the need for domain expertise in whatever domain you're in. Right? Whether you are, you know, as the young lady that was talking about mental health, being that expert so that you know you use the tool as an assistant and not as the final authority on the outcome. And so that's why I think that's important. And having a system to audit itself, or maybe the system, there may be a time that we can get to a place where System A produces an outcome, System B is created to audit that particular outcome, and they're not necessarily trained using the same data, but System B is trained with some constraints about, you know, what the problem that System A was created for. But you wouldn't allow a system to audit itself. The human definitely needs to be there. We need humans with domain expertise, regardless of the domain.
And we need people who could potentially think about how do you have parallel systems auditing one another from different sets of data. So there's potentially an opportunity there. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, Molly, tell us a little bit about accountability and breaking the power structure.
Well, I'm so glad the question was asked about power, because that's definitely a lens that we're taking as we're thinking about how do we make sure workers stand to benefit from this technology when it comes to its use in the workplace, and how do they avoid harm. It's really hard to sort of regulate and legislate the ways companies are going to automate or not in the workplace. One of the most powerful ways we can make sure workers stand to benefit and avoid harm is to make sure they have power in the workplace. And an example of that is the first case study that I wrote at Brookings to look at sort of solutions to this is the example of the Hollywood writers, who some of you might have seen the news. The Hollywood writers went on strike for 5 months last year because they were so concerned in their career that generative AI was going to come in. The studios were going to use it to write first drafts of funny TV shows or movies, and they were going to put loads of people out of work or pay them less because they were going to have to do less of the creative process. And that really concerned these Hollywood writers. They moved with lightning speed. One of my hypotheses is that creatives have imagination, so they could imagine where this was going. And because not only were they in a union, but they were in such a good union that they bargained at the sector level, which means all the Hollywood writers together bargained with all of the studios at once. And they used the threat of taking their talent away to force these studios to come to the table and get remarkable concessions in their contract. And what they did was they got concessions that said, AI cannot be the author. Even if AI is used in the creative process, all the credits and the same compensation will go to that human that is the final author. They also got protections to make sure they weren't going to shrink the writer's room. So basically what happened was this created the incentives that if the studios thought there was a way to enhance the shows you watch on television by the use of AI, they have an incentive to use it. They don't have an incentive to use it to create crappier shows and pay workers less. Workers have the incentive to experiment with this technology because they're not going to lose their job if they do. They're still going to secure their livelihood. That was only done because workers had power. And I interviewed a lot of these. I tell their stories in a really compelling case study. But the individual writer said to me, if I, as one individual writer, had tried to go to the studios and say, don't use AI or here's what I want, they would have laughed at that person. But 11,000 of them in their union collectively secured rights. So there is this question of who has the power to decide how the gains are going to be shared or not, who benefits, who loses a job, how is this going to be deployed? Is this going to be deployed in the workplace in ways that harm or help? The extent to which workers have real power in those decisions will have a huge impact on the outcomes. And so the challenge we face as a society is that in America, very few workers are in a union. And particularly our research shows, Mark is nodding, we call it the great mismatch because in some of the sectors where we expect this technology to have the biggest disruption, we have even less. Like finance has 1% union coverage. Some of these sectors have 4% union coverage, which means 96 to 99% of those workers don't have what those Hollywood writers have. So it becomes this big question, how do we rewire our economy and our society to give workers, and not just shareholders, or not just their employers, or not just the tech companies, more power to determine the ways in which this technology is going to roll out?
Great, thanks, Molly. You wanted to add something?
I just wanted to also add, because Gianna, who asked the question, is one of my students. Thank you, Gianna, for being here. And there's definitely a representation problem when we look in the STEM fields, especially in computer science. So students like Gianna, they will not have the power that the collective of creatives had, right? My students who are present in the room, wave, they are challenged with having to justify being a member of a diverse team. So, you know, there have been studies that have been written to justify diversity in these spaces where this technology is being created, right? When people with lesser skills just show up. And so that conversation needs to change, right? My students should not have to justify. They should just present their powerful credentials and be given an opportunity.
And own that space.
And so, and I think we have to change the conversation around, you know, the need for diversity on these teams. You need strong minds. You need thinkers. And you should open the opportunity and make it available to anyone who fits that criteria and not have to justify the presence and say that, oh, we need diversity of thought. You do need that, but when my students show up with their excellent credentials, they need access to an opportunity.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. So what I'm going to do now, so we're going to do 3 lightning rounds for the panel. That means really, really quick answers on 3 different topics. And then if we have time, I'm going to take 2 questions. Okay, so the first for the panel is the emergence and the use of AI seems like it's really different, and there's certainly a lot of buzz and anxiety produced by ChatGPT, et cetera. But is this really different from the previous use of technology in, you know, sort of life, in business processes? Is it really that different? So I'm going to start with you, Kathy, lightning round, and then I'm going to move across the panel. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So that's the debate. Is it a tool or is it transformative? I'm on the side that it's transformative. I think that AI and generative AI will change how we organize information in our brains, how we think, because the technology changes so fast, where it's creating content, not just drawing from past data. We'll have to contend with problems that we can't imagine now. It will transform, I think, what we do and all that we do, and it will, and I'll end with this, exacerbate inequity. Because if you don't have these skills, or at minimum understanding of them, to go into the fields you're interested in, you will be left out. And so, and they're not easy to acquire. And to even get access to them, someone has the power to decide whether or not you're qualified to learn. So for me, it's transformative. I'm someone, actually, my day job is I work a lot on how to repair harm and reparations. And I think that we need to start thinking about how AI harms now and what might be remedies for that. And I'll stop there.
Thanks very much. Raquel.
Okay, I also think that is transformative. Whenever you can actually use technology to make decisions and to inform policy without the human being in the loop, then there is a vast amount of problems that you can foresee. I think that there's definitely good in the technology and where it can transform some sectors like healthcare, but it also, there needs to be assistance with regards to that.
Humans are still necessary, it turns out.
Very much so.
Okay, well, that's reassuring. Molly.
I'm going to split the difference. So I think in some ways it's not different from past technologies. In some ways it is. So I'm going to agree with something Dr. Rouse said yesterday. Forever, we've had to adapt to new technology in the workplace. And in many ways, this will be no different in the sense that we've faced this kind of challenge before. However, I will say there's lots of ways this technology has surprised those of us like Mark and me who've been studying this for a while. Just a few years ago, the conventional wisdom was technology replaced more mundane tasks, machine-like tasks, and the way to get ahead of the technology was to lean into be more human. And what did more human look like? Get more education, be more cognitive, be more creative, and be more empathetic. And maybe go get some computer programming skills. That was a sort of consensus. And in fact, the Obama administration put out a report on AI and automation less than 10 years ago, and that was sort of the gist of it. ChatGPT has upended that because actually we're surprised by the fact that it's incredibly creative, it's incredibly cognitive, and it's surprisingly really empathetic, and it's calling into question whether you really need to have computer programming skills. So I think there's been some specifics of the way it surprised us, but in a lot of ways the way as society we have to adapt probably won't look that different than past.
Thanks very much. Valerie?
I'm going to focus specifically on the information space, and I'll echo Molly. I think it's mixed. So an example I like to give often is there was an article written in Harper's Magazine, maybe that gives it away, and it was called Fake News in the Media. If anybody wants to guess the decade that was written in, give it a try. The answer is, I think, 1929. So we've had this problem for a while. Yellow journalism was very prominent. The downing of the Maine got us into a war. We still don't know what happened there. So, the falsehoods have this sort of idea that the information space is newly saturated by false information, I think is, that's a misperception, I think. But what is different, and then of course, technology has come along, things have accelerated. Photoshop. We've had Photoshop to be able to create what are called cheap fakes, right? And so, now what we see, though, is, of course, and I talked about this before, this ability to wholly cast doubt on things that are true. I think that's new, and I think that's really harmful. And then what AI brings to the information space is an accelerant, right? So Photoshop takes time. You got to zoom in. You got to really get in on every little detail. It's really, it's a skill. With generative AI now, I can just, again, just kind of conjure up anything from a little wish that I have. And so I think it makes things quicker. It makes things potentially, depending on the model, look very credible. And so I do think it's an accelerant if it's not something wholly new.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, so this is an election event, and we are 60 days or maybe a little less away from the election. So We've heard a lot about misinformation and disinformation. How do we, as consumers of information, election information, how do we know when something's accurate? So I'm going to start with you, Kathy. You're going to model real brevity, and then I'm going to move across. Okay.
I think that requires that we check multiple sources and do research further than what is presented to us. We've already had, and I'll end with this, politicians who have had fake news about them not only have an impact where they live locally, I'm thinking of an Australian mayor, but globally, with little ability to bring that information back and change their reputation. And so I would encourage you, when you receive information, that you double and triple check it.
Great. Thank you. Cal?
Okay. All right. I know I'm supposed to answer this question, but I need to respond to something Molly said about, do you need to know how to program it all, right? I think if you're a software developer, yes, you do. Right? You will always need that skill set. And if you are someone that wanted to tinker around and you just need the skill in a limited set of way, well, maybe no. You don't need that skill. The tool can do it for you. But it's very important. I just want to I just wanted to
Couldn't let
clarify
that go.
Totally
agree.
I could not
As the chair.
as the chair of computer science, I had to make my statement regarding that. And now I forgot the question. Please tell me
So the
again.
question is, how do we know when information, particularly around the election, is accurate?
Yeah, and I think one thing that I do, and I think most people don't, is that I limit, what I read that is presented to me, right? So we all get those feeds, and and it's sending us things based on our profile, and I just limit. I actually seek. I go and I search for, if there's something that I'm concerned about, then I go and search from reputable sources that I know, and I search for that information. But also, as Kathy said, hey, I need to I may even, if I see it there in a source that I trust, then I go and search somewhere else, right? You need a couple of sources in order to say, if I have 5, all of them, if they're all saying the same thing, okay. I'm comfortable with that. But I think I seek information as opposed to just reading and consuming what is sent to me.
Thank you. Molly?
Okay, I'm not going to answer that question because I'm not an expert on it. But I will say, if thinking about the election, and if you're concerned about these issues of AI and work, unfortunately, neither candidate has put out a firm position on this. I checked last night because the Harris-Walz campaign just unveiled a whole bunch of new policy positions in advance of the debate. I checked really quickly to see if there was anything on AI and work. Interestingly, little punt for the next panel, there were 2 mentions on the new platform about AI and competitiveness, nothing specifically on AI and work. Mark and I had an op-ed we tried to get time to run to say, please ask that question. It didn't work. But I think if I was a voter wondering how to make a choice in this next election, given the stakes for all of you on this topic, you have some of the most at stake on this, I would look really carefully at the candidates' records on workers. And that is very clear. I would be asking questions like, do candidates support the right for workers to organize and start unions? Because I think if I was entering the workforce now, I would probably want to be thinking about whether or not I have a real voice in the workforce. I would be asking questions about the safety net. I'd be asking questions about training. And I would certainly be asking the question, when the candidates think about workers and work, do they think of women? And do they think of people of color? Or typically when they talk about work and workers, is it men?
Great. Thank you very much. Val?
I'll just foot stomp what they both said, authoritative information, seeking out multiple sources. And then I'll add 2 additional things very quickly. One is, and this is getting back to what Dr. Nelson said yesterday, is this technology is good, and it's getting really, really good. It's starting to be able to get rid of those 6 fingers or 2 fingers or 6 limbs and things like that, but they're still there often, especially in the off-the-shelf versions of these tools. So knowing what to look for, knowing what to listen for, is the voice that you hear, is it monotone? Does it have weird sort of like pauses that seem too perfectly timed? Humans don't speak like that. So being able to kind of be a little bit more sort of discerning about the types of media you're hearing. And I'll say the last thing, kind of blending into that, especially if it's something shocking or something that is kind of would make you pause and change whatever you're doing, whether it's, oh, I was going to go to my voting booth and vote here, but I just got an audio recording from the person who runs the precinct and they said actually go here. If it's something that seems a little bit fishy in that respect or is going to make you change your behavior in some way that could be quite dramatic, pause a minute, because I think we have really strong cognitive biases, and I think you hit on this earlier, the sort of negative information, loading on that. The world is often quite boring, and so especially in the information space, the matter-of-fact stuff doesn't really stick with us as much as the shocking stuff. And so trying to prioritize the matter-of-fact stuff, trying not to see the things that only confirm what we already believe, trying not to dismiss things that go against what we already believe. All of these processes, I think, are really in play and will make us, I think, all, and I work on this all the time, I have this problem very often, but make us all more sort of responsible consumers of information, especially at such a critical time.
Great. Thank you very much, Val. I will take 2 questions. So, and what we're going to do is, so whoever gets up to the mics fastest. Okay, there are my 2. Wow. I think that's a first.
I was up first, and then everybody gonna run in front.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the 2 questions, and then the panelists are going to answer, and then we're going to wrap. Okay. So congratulations, you made it to the mic first.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Janice Moore, alumni of Spelman, class of '83. I'm a retired teacher. My question is, do you think that AI is going to eliminate and take over for jobs? And I'll give you some examples. For instance, like in Walmart and Pastor, they have robots that do jobs. Now in my credit union, they're no longer tellers. You got ATM that you got to do your own job. You go to the shopping, you go to the grocery store, you have to do your own everything. So in essence, I'm working for them, but I'm paying them. Ooh. So my thing is that my dad always said that, when you're right, you stand, you don't let nobody make you wrong, you stand on your grounds. And I know you're saying that one person cannot make a difference. I beckon you wrong, because we have one person who took prayer out of school. So, and I always, no matter what, as a teacher, I stood my ground and made my way myself as one person. Nobody would follow me, but I said, if I feel it's not right, like my dad said, I'm not going to allow them to take that right from me. So I stand my ground. So everybody from everywhere, every school I went, they knew I stood my ground. And if I spoke, it happened, because I don't let nobody make me wrong when I'm right. But so I'm so scared about this AI, because so many people, jobs are closing down, and so many people, we're doing our own work now. So, and you even get the robot call the people like they're human, but it's a robot. It's not a human calling your house with these telemarketing stuff. So it's scary, to know, because you can know your work and know your job well, but with this computer coming in, even you learn a lot about it, it's still taking over. So is that something that we're going to have to worry about? Because look at all the companies closing down.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. We're going to hold on the answer, and then we're going to take the second question, and then we'll answer both of those.
Okay. Hi, my name is Cadence Patrick. I'm a senior computer science major at Spelman College from Oakland, California. And I just wanted to ask a little bit more about how Gen AI is an accelerant. We were talking about, I think we're in danger of overlooking the small details. So as you were saying about how, the technology is getting really good, those 6 fingers are starting to go away, the tells are becoming less and less obvious. And the same goes for generative AI in terms of language. So we don't know when things are written by humans or not anymore. And so I wanted to ask, what is the most important message that we can send to young people, especially young voters, about how to engage with the misuse of AI while still trying to be optimistic about the future and our options?
Okay, great. I'm actually going to let you maybe take both of them.
So I didn't catch your name. I was trying to listen, but Dr. Janice, I just wanted to thank you for that question, because I think you speak what a lot of people feel, and that's reflected in polling. It's also reflected in a lot of the interviews I do with workers. There's a lot of concern about this technology, and I think it's because in fact, in a lot of surveys, when people are asked what are they most concerned about with AI, jobs and job risk tends to be at the very top, if not the top. And I think that's intuitive. Our jobs are often a form of identity. They support our families. If we are to lose our jobs, that is hugely disorienting, especially if it's coming into the context of you're not just losing an individual job, but maybe what I invested my education or my career in is no longer something that can sustain me. So it's a very scary thought, and I think that's why you're seeing so much interest in this technology. I think what's reassuring is that this is not the first time a technology has come and people have gotten very scared. And in fact, I did note you mentioned the ATM and the teller, and actually I'm writing a new case study on the teller, so I'm quite interested in that story. But surprisingly, when the ATM came out, everyone was concerned, this was in the 1980s, that the bank teller was just going to completely disappear. And counterintuitively, the number of bank tellers rose for over a decade after bank ATMs reached peak penetration. And that's because, counterintuitively, it became cheaper for bank branches to open new branches because of the ATM. And for a while, the number of tellers went up. A lot of things like that have happened, things that we thought, oh, well, we're very exposed. It turns out we adapted, and like we were talking about some of the examples. I mean, the number of accountants have rose even despite the fact that some of this technology has come out. So sometimes I think some of this fear a lot of people have, past history suggests oftentimes that hasn't come to fruition. We have more jobs now than we ever have, and frankly, that's probably unlikely to change for the foreseeable future. We also have an aging population. We're gonna have to replace a lot of jobs. That being said, I will say there's a bad news story about the bank teller. It wasn't the ATM that has decimated the number of bank tellers. It was actually mobile money and mobile wallets. And in the last 10 years, the number of bank tellers has gone down by a third. And your point about customer service, generative AI is getting better and better and better at customer service, and those jobs really, I think there is a lot of peril on that. I do think there is a concern about jobs, and I think what's a little disorienting about this technology is it's sort of surprising. We don't know which jobs are actually going to be the ones that really do feel displacement, and we were talking about this yesterday. The creative industry didn't see that they were at risk 3 years ago, and now they are. So I think there is a sense of disorientation. I think the good news story is most economists don't think jobs as a whole are going away. In fact, there will continue to be demand for labor, but that doesn't mean there isn't some individual risk and some anxiety. And so I think it's something we all as a society have to reckon with. How can we avoid unnecessary displacements? And how can we make sure that we're prepared and resilient? So I think overall, I am not concerned that all jobs are going away. In fact, in my research, the majority of jobs aren't really that touched by this technology at this point. Plumbers are not going away. Your hairstylist is not going away. There's so many jobs that aren't going away. That being said, I think things are going to be very disruptive, and it's really hard for us to predict which jobs are most at risk, and I think that adds to the anxiety.
I think it's good to know that my hair is not going to be done by a robot.
No, it's not. In fact, I talked about this with my hairstylist last week. I said we go to the hairstylist in part for the socializing. Yeah. I don't see it going away.
So I'm going to let Dr. Raquel give our final message to students, and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay. I think regarding the jobs, I wanted to say that we've seen a lot of automation. And even before there was generative AI, a lot of things were automated. If we look in the manufacturing plant, what that's going to require is that workers upskill. And that could possibly be challenging. And so there's not going to be a way around that. We've seen a lot of those jobs go away. And I think that will continue to happen, and it will begin to affect, you said, those with the BAs and everything like that. Regarding the last statement, question, Cadence asked, and I didn't hear your question, so maybe you can.
Yeah, it's around, we're participating in the election. What are some of the things that students need to know in general just about this technology, about the way the technology is moving, so that we can just be informed consumers and contributors to society?
So I think, I'm always about learning. Cadence is one of my students. Thank you for being here today, Cadence. And so learn as much as you possibly can. It is important that all of our students have some level of skill in data science broadly defined. It touches everything that we do. And so having that understanding, also be an expert in your domain. It is so important, right? Because you need to have the ability to assess the information that you have and even the way you approach consuming it and things of that nature. So I think that you need to understand those things on all levels. Also think about how you share information about yourself, and that is so important. And when it comes to evaluation from jobs, it's all about the profile that you made online. When there is technology that allow you to increase your privacy, engage with that technology. Everything that we browse online and syncing your devices, think about whether you want to sync your laptop with your tablet, with your phone, because that enlarges your footprint and it allows you to be tracked across devices. We can talk about it in our networks and security class, about browser fingerprinting and things of that nature. And a fingerprint is identifying. And so if now I can be identified on my laptop, identified on my tablet, identified on my phone, and all of this basically creates this broad profile, the more information I have about you, the more unique you are. Uniqueness is a necessary but not a sufficient condition to link you to other information that doesn't necessarily have identifying characteristics, okay? We can talk about that. Just be mindful about how you share, how you engage online, how you consume information, and always get knowledge.
Thank you, Dr. Raquel. I want you to join me in thanking this fabulous and impressive panel. Thank you.
Good to see you. Yes, yes. Thank you. Yes, oh, I know. Thank you. Pretty loud. Yes. Because I've been academic faculty before. Let me know. I got you. Let's do this. Okay, I got you.
Good morning and welcome to the second panel of the symposium. Welcome audience here, welcome audience in the virtual world. My name is Jerry Volsey and I will be leading the panel discussion today. We have heard a lot of the perils and the troubles and the potential problems that AI can bring upon society. And our panel is going to be looking at the other side of that coin. What are some of the benefits? What are some of the opportunities? And what are some of the things that we can leverage AI for to better us as a society? To help us in that, we have a fabulous panel, starting with Talitha Washington, our very own Director of the Data Science Initiative and President of the Association of Women in Mathematics. Shanasa Okala, Fellow for the Center of Technology Innovation and Governance Studies at Brookings Institution. Kamal Bob, no stranger to our campus, Director of STEM Education and Strategies at Google, and Founding Director of the Constellation Center for Equity in Computing at Georgia Tech. Dr. Bao is also a trustee of Spelman College. And last, certainly not least, Mark Muro, Senior Fellow, Brookings Metro, Brookings Institution. Panel, welcome. we are going to have our panel as an open conversation. I welcome the panelists to keep your answers nice and brief. I also welcome you to really ask each other questions. All right, this is a conversation between experts. I am merely a facilitator. Ask each other questions. Follow up on the different responses. Feel free to offer different points of view. Not to be controversial, but we are dealing with a subject that is upcoming, and there's plenty of opportunity for a variance in points of view, and so putting that on display, I think, is a huge benefit to our audience. And audience, as we're going through this, please start thinking about your questions, because we will have a Q&A session at the end of all of this. Okay, that said, let's begin. We're going to start with the easy, low lift, sort of the big picture in terms of some of the things that we've heard, some of the challenges that has been discussed in terms of privacy issues, in terms of job loss, in terms of all the other possible ways that AI could not be of benefit. I imagine someone who's new to this field, who's just exploring AI and is in the audience, may be wondering, why are we doing this? What's the big picture? What are the things that AI can do that warrants, living with these kinds of risks? Sure, AI can filter out my spam email. AI can correct my grammar when it's inevitably incorrect. But that doesn't seem like that would be worth the kinds of risk we're talking about. So, Dr. Washington, I'm going to start with you. Can you paint a big picture? This is just level setting. What are some of the big ideas in AI that makes it such a compelling technology that we should be exploring? What are some of the potential benefits?
Well, I guess you don't like the whole generative AI to correct your grammar. You must be a good writer. I, on the other hand, actually do like it when that little Grammarly kind of pops up and says,
I like it.
ooh, don't do that, or don't say that, or... So AI, it really can be seen as a tool to augment human performance. It's not to necessarily replace humans, it's just to augment. Just as back in the day, as a mathematician, right back in the day, we had the introduction of the TI-80 1, 2, 3, 4 calculators into the classroom, and we were saying, oh my goodness, our students going to be able to add now that we have a calculator. Well, we kind of figured that one out. And yes, students can still add, and yes, we can augment student learning, augment balancing our checkbook, and so on by using the calculator. Does it replace us? Being add 1 + 1 is, I guess, 2? No, but it does enhance our ability, perhaps, to perform calculations, to see visualizations. Artificial intelligence can do that for us in our just everyday life, in thinking about ways it can track where we're going, or also help us to write better, to create images, to create songs. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of, I guess, security and privacy, giving your data away. How much information do we want to share? Because as I was coming in, I was listening to a video on YouTube that was talking about the new iPhone coming out that has AI all over it. What is it? Apple Intelligence. And I'm thinking, that means Apple Intelligence is going to have my emails, where I'm going, who I'm talking to, how I'm talking to them, all of this data. Wait, what are they going to do with it? So there's a little bit of concern there. At the end of the day, I do like to write emails with correct grammar, because it's a large part of my job, unfortunately. But that's a way of modality for communicating. And so it does augment me in certain ways. But also I can discern and choose how to use it, so I'm not overburdened and overcome by just AI replacing me, but using it as a tool to enhance what I'm doing at a larger scale.
Can our students use AI in this way? I mean, what are some of the ways they can start using it immediately?
This is after he said give short comments. Oh, okay. Well, at the illustrious Clark Atlanta University, we actually spent the summer, I was on a committee, where we actually created AI guidelines to help professors grapple with, or maybe become informed about, how artificial intelligence can or cannot be used in the classroom. What we came up with really was I think, a nice 2-page PDF document. It was a lot of bantering going on that really just informed faculty to say, hey, you got to have something about AI on your syllabus. You need to be informed that students can put these item prompts into a box and come out with a complete solution, right? Again, as a mathematician, we saw the same thing with the calculator, so this is not anything new in education. But to have faculty to say, hey, you can, what we came up with 3 levels. You can have open use, you can use it, you can have like minimal use, like you can use it on some, but maybe not in other, and then no use. But to have faculty discern how they would like to use AI in the learning, and then also to recognize that AI can be used as a tool in learning, right? So my kid's at Xavier. Unfortunately, she's going to be evacuating this evening, coming back to Atlanta, but she's in Xavier University in New Orleans in a data science major, not my fault. And so I asked her, well, how do you use AI? She was like, well, I have there's these tutoring apps, and I can put in different prompts, put in questions, and it can help me learn the subject. And they give me better answers than my professors. And I was like, oh, this is my child, first of all. But, you know, so students are using AI. They're coming in, they're using it in ways maybe that we want or maybe that we don't want. So I think we just need to be really thoughtful and communicate with students how to use it, when is it appropriate, when is not appropriate. It shouldn't replace your learning, it should augment learning. And how is that done? So I think it's an exciting time in education.
Thank you, thank you. I'm going to sort of follow up on that and I'm going to ask you. One of the things that we've observed in the Innovation Lab where I do my work is that students, particularly the students in the creative disciplines, come in with a lot of anxiety around AI, understandably, because their field of study is the most visibly disrupted, violently disrupted in some cases, by the advent of AI. What sort of advice would you give such a student who's afraid that they're going to be out of a job when they come in? Some of these students, I'll just add, have a deep dislike of AI. They're dismissive of it altogether, and attempts to reach them about what some of the possible benefits of AI are is a difficult conversation. What sort of advice would you give to such a student?
Well, I think the first order of advice, I think, is to recognize that we're in the middle of a pretty significant paradigmatic shift that's huge. So on one hand, in response to your first question, well, why is this such a big deal? So here, this, you know, the analogy to the calculator and the like, I think is significant, but in some ways it's analogous to fire. So we have these technical tools that you can ask questions of, and they're generating intelligent responses. So there's a question about, well, what is intelligence? So the question that came up earlier about, is this something that can exceed human thinking? Do we even want it? And do we have a metric for that? So if you're a student coming into an academic institution where your intellectual power is the measure of your identity, and now you have this technical thing that's competing against that, it's a question of agency. So what is the human agent role in all of this? So to me, it stands to reason that students would be afraid. I think to come to the specifics of, you know, if I want to study said thing, and these AI technologies and tools are threatening the existence, the relevance of whatever it is that I'm trying to study, in some ways you can be crude and say, well, you either stick your head in the sand or you stand tall and fight. So the idea of trying to acknowledge and just dismiss it, it just doesn't work. That's not how progress works. That's how you end up with people who get left behind. Communities, individuals, schools, institutions, all of it. So if you're not really engaged at the forefront of the technical frontier, you get left behind. That's just how it works. So to that point, I think Dr. Hill was raising the point that this is in your role, in your domain of expertise. You have to acquire the expertise that makes whatever it is that you're doing relevant to the technical time in which we live. There's no escaping that fact. So I think the advice to students is to be just that. So that we've used this kind of interdisciplinarity argument for years, and this is where it's really coming to bear. Because the connections between the technical frontier, the substrate against which we're measuring all of these things, it's penetrating into every field. So to the extent that you can recognize that, get ahead of it, be fluent in it, that's where we'll be finding success.
Can I just add one thing
Yes.
to what you were saying? I think the professed goal of the AI project, as articulated by big tech, is often new levels of superhuman intelligence, which is certainly on the table, but it hasn't been about support of people, creation of useful tools, and those sort of things. And I think that's accentuated the problem you're talking about. You know, that the goal is actually, the professed goal has been one that's kind of terrifying for a lot of people. Just throwing that out.
Okay. Shanasa, let's bring you into this conversation. I know you've done quite a bit of work in developing communities, and can you speak a little bit about your work and how AI has been of value to you?
Of value to me personally, or just
no,
in
to
my
the
work?
to the effort.
Okay, great. Sure. Yeah. So during my dissertation work at Cornell, my research focused on how AI could help augment the work of community healthcare workers, particularly in rural India. And so, really trying to understand, how AI could best enable their work, and also some of the pitfalls they experienced in terms of their primary or very, I'd say, like fundamental interactions with AI technologies. I conducted fieldwork in Uttar Pradesh, and we found that while these workers were very interested in using AI, there were some cases where they felt that where we actually experienced that they would be able to defer to it instead of leveraging their own respective expertise, and then also where they actually recognize that they actually have the power, or they still hold a fundamental role in leveraging AI. And so, actually, one of the titles of my papers is "It Cannot Do All of My Work," because that's a quote that one of our healthcare workers said directly to us. And so I think it's really important, that they understood that they still have to operate AI, and also that AI can't replace some of the very, sensitive tasks and also conversations that they have with their communities, particularly around breastfeeding and family planning as well. And so my dissertation work varies a bit from what I focus on now, which is basically, or essentially, AI governance issues around AI and data within Africa particularly. And so I've been working with the African Union over the past 2 years in developing the AU AI continental strategy, and also working with the Nigerian government in developing their national AI strategy. And so, particularly in the Global South, and I want to echo some of the things that Dr. Washington has said, is that I think AI is really, being seen as something that can augment existing, human capacity, and also, particularly in the case of the Global South and Africa, help kind of, I would say, close some of these disparities that we're seeing, despite, the varying differences in capacity for African countries to take advantage of AI. I think there's many opportunities that these countries see in helping, to expand healthcare, expand agriculture, and also just improve economies overall.
Okay, thank you. A quick question for you. In your work in that space, as you're introducing AI into, say, healthcare decision makings or any other decision making, do you run into the situation where humans tend to defer to the decision that the AI makes rather than using their own sensibilities? And is that a problem, and how do you deal with that?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I experienced this more so in my work with community healthcare workers in rural India. And so I think the issue is that because, these community healthcare workers, saw AI as this very fancy technology, and also because of the issues that they experienced with their respective, as power structures and their places in society, they figured that, oh, if we have this fancy tool, our, patients will actually, one, adhere to our recommendations more often, and then also, actually take us a bit more seriously, because in many cases in their interactions with male patients, for example, they tend to get a lot of pushback, and also a lot of these community healthcare workers, or ASHAs, in India are women, and so they've experienced lots of different issues in that. And so when I think about the African examples in Africa, I don't really have many to rely on, but I actually saw a really interesting paper that was published recently showing that in radiology, when these radiologists were using AI, their efficiency actually lowered because they were relying more so on this technology versus their respective judgment. And so I think it's really important that we kind of shift away from this framing of AI as replacing human labor, rather than being able to augment human labor, and also work towards developing AI interfaces that allow for this, allow for, like people or to, let's say, like, I would say overpower AI recommendations and not have to like defer to them.
Wow, that's interesting. Like, Mark, I'm going to go to you. Just teeing off from what Shanasa just said, we're seeing examples where the use of AI actually reduces the accuracy and the proficiency of certain workers. What does that say about the labor workforce in terms of what's required? Do we still need experts, or do we need people who are just a little bit more nuanced in terms of understanding and interpreting what AI does?
Yeah, I think this is a crucial. I mean, in many ways, AI is about wider distribution of expertise, maybe the devaluation of the mystique of the meritocracy and the sort of super elite dressed up expertise, and the democratization of, so, I mean, that, and you know, I don't put me down for, excessive optimism about this, but I do think in some of this there is a potential of a very broad, potentially helpful move towards equity and inclusivity from these technologies. I mean, there are plenty of ways that these technologies can exacerbate inequality, no doubt. Not only do they maybe multiply the skills of the elite that remain, maybe have even more clout. Remember that these corporations, that the AI is usually introduced in corporations as a tool of capital. So essentially, we know how the benefits of productivity tend to get shared in an often narrow way. But still, I mean, I think worry, you could see a relatively benign scenario here, that the basic incidence of AI impacts on occupations could lead, to more people having a degree of expertise. Our work at Brookings shows that AI appears especially likely to automate the jobs of, quite high pay white collar workers, and leaves blue collar service and other in-person jobs more or less alone, at least for a while. I mean, I think you would agree with that, Molly, right? So in that sense, without overstating it, you could think that it would be automating the kinds of tasks done by white-collar workers more so than those of blue-collar service or in-person jobs. So I just want to throw out the possibility of a kind of societal-wide rebalancing from extreme, super elite-driven disparities to a somewhat more balanced. Now, I think we're pretty pessimistic about how some of this might go down, but I think we should hold open that possibility,
Can I offer context?
Yes.
I think that it's important to consider the historical moment that we're in.
Yeah.
So we have this extraordinary technical transformation that's happening, coincident with a legal transformation that is undermining the country as we know it. So in some ways, I'm 52 years old. In one way, I'm 52 years old. But the significance of that, in some ways, illustrates where we are. So born in 72, essentially 8 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So in some ways, I'm the first generation of free black people born in American history ever. And if we think about the programs that we've been involved in, dealing with STEM education, engineering, mathematics, all these things, the formation of a lot of the organization for advocacy for these things began at that time. So NSBE started, I think, in 1975, the National Society of Black Engineers. BESA, the Black Engineering Science Students Association at Berkeley, started in 1968. The Bakke decision at California was in 1978 that introduced affirmative action in higher education. The Roe decision was in 1973. All those things happened at that time, and it's all over. So in this era, that has all shifted. And it's coincident with this remarkable technology transformation.
That's a great point.
So there's a question that we're asking about how is it going to engender the kind of distribution of technical skills and the supremacy of the human agency against very legal constraints on who is able to exist in some ways as an American. And I think that if we lose sight of the legal headwinds that we're against, where there's actual aggressive animus towards people trying to participate, we can use this AI discussion as a ruse. You go focus on this AI for education and education for AI and the like, but over here I'm going to undermine your rights, take away your ability to exist, to vote, to learn. For those of you who are welcoming from DC, our state secretary of education just banned the teaching of advanced placement African American studies in the entire state. That happened while we're having a discussion about AI. So to the extent that we make sure that we're not losing sight of the historical moment that we're in, I think it's important to calibrate the utility of AI against the political and social movement that we're actually in.
Yeah, excellent, excellent, excellent. We're going to come back to that very topic in greater detail here in a little bit. Anybody want to respond to that? Mark, I want to dissect a little bit one of the things that you mentioned about white-collar workers being displaced. Is it the case that the thought is that AI could potentially displace some of the technical skills, engineering, maybe computer, maybe software programs and things like that? But if you're thinking about, say, building a bridge, right? That project involves the technical elements of the bridge. It involves selling it to the public, the people around that bridge where traffic patterns might change.
Yeah.
It involves making an economic argument about why that bridge is required. It involves talking to legislators and so on and so forth. AI is poised to be able to someday do the engineering part of that. But it seems like the part that it can't really do well is the human element of actually selling that bridge. So is there an opportunity here for, on the last panel, we talked about the BA students being displaced. Does this create an opportunity for BA students who don't necessarily need to be engineers to actually head up a project like that? Anybody?
I mean, I'll jump in. I mean, I think that's what I was trying to get at, that, all things equal, it is relatively devaluing of white-collar elite skills that could be better, that could be more easily distributed to support workers and doing more work themselves, or point say an HVAC person having point of work, information for how to do more sophisticated work, and therefore sort of clawing back a little bit more autonomy, agency, and valuing by the economy. Like, again, I don't want to overstate that, but I think that is a sort of possibility. And so, and it may reduce the demand for some skills that are tied up with super elite, historical education. So I think there's some possibility there that more people could do more using both their own skills and skills, say, from a BA or a community college degree, supplemented with AI-driven support.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
So I do like modeling bridges. As an applied mathematician, I enjoy traversing the engineering spaces. But you were saying that, so AI can help you build the bridge as long as you feed in the right forces, the right structures, obviously what's around it, all the rest of that. And it can, but it's a garbage in, garbage out sort of thing. If you don't put the right, we'll say metrics or my favorite bridge to model would be the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, the one that oscillated in Washington State and kind of crashed. I always say engineers built the bridge and mathematicians, we figured out how it crashed. But anyway, that's another story.
Whatever.
Exactly. That's what we do, right? That's what we do. And so it can help you build the bridge. And I think you were going on to the sentiment analysis aspect of, can AI actually help you sell the bridge? I think it can, right? So you could do a sentiment, you can do data scraping around, you can figure out who's, use census data and so on to figure out who lives around the bridge, who the influencers are, who are the players. You could do a data scraping of LinkedIn, Facebook, all these open media pages, figure out how people vote and that sort of thing, right? So you can do a data gathering to determine, or at least to speculate, we'll say, how you can influence those to actually like the bridge. I mean, we kind of, since we're talking about elections, right? We could talk about the voter suppression case that happened in Florida with the Trump campaign back in the day, right, in Miami-Dade County. So, it has been used, obviously, for harm, right? But you can also think about using it for maybe a new positive bridge that could actually help create a more sustainable environment. And so I think AI can inform us how we can see and interact with human behavior. At the end of the day, it is garbage in, garbage out. And so the person who's actually either developing the technologies or employing or applying all the rest of that, they need to understand what it can do, what it cannot do, how it can inform a decision or inform a pathway or not inform a pathway. And then another example, when you talk about the healthcare, a lot of healthcare insurance companies, they are using your electronic health records, EHR, data to determine what level of care that you get, or if you get that level of care. And so I know I always ask the obvious questions. Well, in mathematics, we have a predictor-corrector method. So if you predict that this is one's level of care, well, how do you correct for it? How do you know that that was the right decision made? And usually when I ask that sort of question, I get crickets. And I'm going, okay, something about this doesn't sound right. And so I think that there is momentum. I want to say there is momentum on the Hill to kind of figure out, and I'll say it this way, an IRB language for artificial intelligence to protect humans, right? So back in the day, we had our U.S. government did the Tuskegee syphilis experiment in Alabama and infected black males with syphilis and just let it propagate to see how it went through society. It was a data collection mechanism. And so from that, we have now safeguards to protect human subjects in research. I think we'll come at a similar avenue with artificial intelligence. It's taken us a while. I think that if you look on the Hill, there are a lot of bills that are being proposed left and right on AI. I think policymakers are trying to figure out what and how to do it. And I'm not sure, how much conversations they've had with, we'll say us. I'm saying us in the broadest sense. And so I think I would just encourage folks to be engaged with your policymakers, be engaged with government, be engaged with voting. All three of those really will impact this evolution of AI and how it will inform you getting health care, how will it be informed you getting pulled over by the police for facial recognition or what have you, how will it inform sentencing, how will it inform, whether you get a loan or not, right? And so, or how will it inform the next bridge coming up in your community. And so I really just would empower everybody to think about how their vote in this election will determine the propagation of AI for the good or for the bad. And I think it really will come down to how we vote at every level, from president to judges to DAs to every level has a stake in how artificial intelligence will be deployed in our society. And if we don't, we'll say, exercise that vote, well, if you don't, if you're not a part of it, then you know what happens. You're subject to it, right? You either play the game or get played, one of the two.
That's a great segue into the next phase of the conversation that I'd like to have. It is historically been the case that new technologies tend to really benefit one segment of the population, typically the socioeconomically advantaged, those in position to take advantage of it, while perhaps not being as beneficial to another segment of the population, those who are, you're either at the dinner table or you're on the menu, right? So those who are perhaps not benefiting from it as much. And whether a technology is perceived as a peril or an opportunity sort of depends on which side of that divide one is on. So how do we and I'm speaking now specifically as the African American community, how do we ensure at a personal level, at a community level, at an academic level, at a policy advocacy level, how do we ensure that we are on the producer side and the beneficiary side of AI technology? Why don't we start with the education side?
I was going to say Mark is honorary African American today.
Honorary member. So, Cynthia, why don't you start? On the education side of it, are we assess our level of readiness?
I think we're here. Start from the bottom, now we're here, right? Okay, so as director of the Helene University Center Data Science Initiative and also director PI of the NSF, National Science Foundation, National Data Science Alliance, we work across all historically Black colleges and universities to really support the building of capacity around both research and education and all things data and data related. So obviously that includes artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, quantum. I mean, all these things are super fun. And so when I see what people are doing, I just came back from North Carolina A&T State University, and they have an autonomous vehicles lab where they're using AI to create these self-driving cars. And we were able to see how they were doing it, how they have these big screens and virtual reality, creating trainings for those who are working on the farms with chickens. I kept hearing chickens. It's kind of interesting. And then also you have Morgan State, who has a Center for Equity in AI and Machine Learning, they're doing a tremendous amount of effort in really bridging that interplay between equity, AI, machine learning, with, I think, grounded in the HBCU mission to really support the Black community as a whole. We have our neighbor, Tuskegee University in Alabama, who's looping together artificial intelligence and agriculture. AI and ag is really huge, right? So we talk about self-driving cars. Well, I'm from Indiana. We have self-driving tractors who will plow the fields and till the lawn so that you can have produce at your local supermarket. And so they're really, I think, some really neat places that are doing and really building artificial intelligence. Here in Atlanta, since we influence everything, we have at Morehouse, Dr. Kenneth Gaucher, who leads the Broadening Participation Center in Computing, we've partnered with him in teaching, in Georgia Tech, too, in teaching AI and how do you do productions, right? And so really just, there's some really neat ways in which folks are thinking about this AI. Another group of faculty at Clark Atlanta in social work, they're infusing data science, just got funded by NSF, yay. They're infusing data science into the social work curriculum because social workers need to be data informed and also AI ready because they probably have AI tools that may provide them with information on how to either interact or treat their constituencies. So how do we prepare them for that? And so they're just, I think, exciting projects, opportunities, research, education that's building across the landscape of historically Black colleges and universities that really excite me. And happening right now in Baltimore, or Baltimore, depending on where you're from, there's the HBCU Research AI Symposium where HBCU leaders are getting together and really talking about what we're doing around AI research, and then how do we propagate that forward to the next level. So that's happening right now as I'm speaking. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. There are a lot of things happening. Should there be more things that will happen? Yes, of course. And the work is plentiful. It cuts across all disciplines, not just STEM, not just math. Of course, math is the queen of all sciences, but you know, that was Gauss if you didn't know. But it really cuts across all disciplines. And so in a few weeks, the Mellon Foundation, partnering with Spelman, I'll be speaking about AI across the humanities and how is AI being leveraged in the humanities and how can humanities actually push the evolution of AI to its next level. So I find it exciting and really cool.
All right. Kamal, anything you want to add to that?
Sure, I was hoping to hear from Chinasa.
Oh,
well, I'm not really in academia right now, so I'll definitely defer to you, but I'll think of, if things come up, I'll mention
I
it.
bet. So I wanted to ground us a little bit, I think, in, again, welcoming our colleagues to Atlanta. So one of the distinctions that I think is important is AI for education versus education for AI. So the AI for education is the utility of tools, the application of all these things that you may be able to do that will enhance your learning, your autonomous, individualized tutoring and the like, all these certifications, all of these things that corporations are now giving us to say that this will enhance your capacity to do said thing. That's not the same thing as getting education to be able to build those tools. That's an entirely different proposition. And that is a much narrower gate. And so to those, again, coming to Atlanta, the Atlanta public school system is one of the most segregated in the United States. And we have essentially a 50-50 population. So segregation here means something. Because if you just have a couple blacks and you put them in a corner, it's not the same thing as have 50% black people and 40% white people who don't go to school together. In the Atlanta public school system, only about 12% of all black students are proficient in basic algebra, which means that the entire substrate of what we're trying to do in computational education is virtually inaccessible to the vast majority of students who exist in the public school system that is here. We can go into the significance of algebra, even relevant to what we're actually doing in generative AI, because of the kind of sequential probabilistic mechanism that is right at the heart of it. If you don't understand the basic variable manipulation, you can't get access to it. Also, at schools like Georgia Tech, we essentially have one class, one, in the entire institution that is a pre-calculus class. So if you don't have calculus in high school, you're structurally ineligible from getting access to Georgia Tech, which is at the frontier of the education for AI. So therefore, if we're thinking about all these institutions, MIT just came out in the New York Times, they slashed the population of black students as a consequence of the overturn of the affirmative action with the Students with Fair Admissions case. It's the same at Georgia Tech. We have 30% less black students who are admitted this year than last year, 30% in one administrative admission cycle. So what we're doing, we're taking the frontier of where education for AI takes place. Of course, there's a parallel initiatives that are going on at HBCUs. I know I'm going to hear it. But I'm making this case anyway. So if we are thinking about those institutions that are at the frontier in the entire world, and we've locked off access to black students from being able to participate in that, the picture that Dr. Lee showed in the beginning that had Temis from DeepMind, it had Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and all those guys, they all went to Stanford, Harvard, MIT, Berkeley. And we've just shut the door. So therefore, the access to those institutions has been summarily closed. And I think we have to come to grips with the reality of what that actually means. So then I would offer the challenge, and I'll stop here, is as we're thinking about the utility of AI, the challenge here is for the big structural variables that are existent now to reorganize themselves to ensure that the singular responsibility of public education doesn't sit on those public education institutions themselves, which have proven to be incapable of educating our people.
I think I deserve that. Shanasa, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I would say one thing I'm significantly worried about, particularly as it pertains to, say, like primary and secondary education, is that the number of AI companies developing, let's say AI-focused education or academic tools. I grew up in inner city Kansas City, Missouri, and attended Kansas City public schools for all of my primary and secondary education. At one time, the Kansas City public schools district was actually unaccredited for a bit. And so I think a lot of companies, especially in the wake of the pandemic, which is still ongoing, are trying to figure out ways to help, I'd say, lessen, some of these gaps, educational gaps that we've seen that were caused due to distance learning and, many of the inequities, that were experienced through there. And so I think that policy will actually play a very big role in terms of, ensuring that these tools actually work for students, and also that, school districts that are marginalized, don't have to waste money that could be redirected towards other resources as well.
Great. Anybody want to respond to either one of those statements?
I just jump in. All of this is especially dangerous in the area of digital technologies because it's not just that digital technologies are run by, greedier men. It's actually about the nature of the digital technologies that that we need to guard against. They have this tendency to polarize because they intensify the benefits for some and create divides for others. So this is just a recognized tendency. So then when you combine this with allowing increased inclusion from basic digital training, you have an extremely dangerous situation in which the tendency of the technology is connected to the tendency of the society. And so to me, this gets to trying to hold on to some kind of hopefulness here. It means that you have to push against the standard direction, and I feel like across all of these issues, laissez-faire will lead us into more and more polarized directions, and so we have to make this a societal push to counter it. And we can talk about how this plays out, among individuals, and we talk about how it plays out among neighborhoods and places as well, which is another dynamic I'm very worried about. So.
Can I add a point to that? I think that that framing is incredibly important, particularly if we're using language that might be born from Nicol's book, The Digitally Invisible. So if we take that one step further, what does it mean to create a class of digital slaves? And so now we don't like that language because it's kind of antithetical to where we want to go, but we have an environment where the legal transformation is trying to create that. So if you think, again, for our colleagues who are visiting Atlanta, as in every city as you go to now, you jump into Uber and Uber Eats and you see who's at the bottom of the chain. Those are the people that are essentially digital slaves. They're using these technologies to just basically survive, but those are the people who are actually just dependent on these little tools because they haven't gone to school necessarily, or they're immigrants that have been undervalued because they can't get access to the communities in the ways in which they can. But if you come to Atlanta, for example, you'll see it. I've never seen a white woman who's driving an Uber here, ever. And if you think about what that means, and I'm not trying to be crude about it, but you'll find that there's an over-representation of black men and women who drive Uber, Uber Eats. I had this awful experience during the pandemic where if you go shortly thereafter, when you go into the supermarkets, like at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's a ton of black women in there with their phones shopping for other people.
Shopping, yeah.
And this lady asked me, and she came up and she said, "Brother, I just don't know what this thing is." And it was a pomegranate. And so she's trying to buy this pomegranate for somebody else. And to me, that's the manifestation of going out, using the technology to get stuff for the big house and bring it home. And so if we're using that in the context of the question that you've asked, what is the educational implication of all of this? We can generate, to Mark's paper from years ago, the digitalization of the workforce. The crude end of that analogy that I thought you made there was the creation of a digital slave class. And I think if we're using the actual terms, then it enables us to engender the kind of response to it that would be hopeful.
And a digital overclass.
Exactly right.
See, that's the way this technology works. And it's not just again, some tendency of the workers in it. It's about the technology, which is network-based, big returns to individual people, firms, and places. So there are problems with that we have to start engineering to truly, if we want a different outcome, we have to engineer differently across the whole society. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks to the point you made before, that a laissez-faire attitude about this is not likely to work. So we have to be deliberate about the steps that we take. Can you offer some specifics in terms of steps individuals can take, communities can take, and ultimately policymakers?
Yes. So I think I think there's an example to be had. Specifics always try to nail you down. Let me talk like a politician for a second. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to reorganize essentially the coefficients of power on the policy actors. And the question that's abiding here is, how do we improve the educational infrastructure to engender a larger proportion of people who are actually getting education for AI? And here I'll use Talitha's point. So that the HBCU, in the post-Floyd environment, we all went gangbusters on HBCUs and black people and what have you. Chief diversity officers, money flowing like water all over the place until it was over, and then it's over. But what could be done about that? The opportunity here is to suggest that in public institutions, that the emergence of the big tech firms that have happened essentially in this first quarter of this century. Google wasn't around Google was in 1998. 1998. I think Facebook started in 2004. Apple's iPhone was 2007 or 8 or 9 or something. All this is brand new. These are trillion-dollar operations. These are nation states that have essentially absconded any responsibility of taking care of the educational public trust to the people that are their principal consumers. So a way to reorganize, coming to your question about specificity, is that we can't burden the local municipality with trying to educate these people in some equitable way when it's surrounded by nation states who are not paying attention to them. That's crazy. So to me, one specific way to approach this would be to try to challenge cities to break that infrastructure, such that there's a distributed sense of responsibility to the education of the people who are the actual ultimate consumers and the citizens coming back to the election who will feel relevant in the society and therefore care about voting.
Yeah, so for me, I honestly think that digital literacy is very important. I actually spoke at the Respect conference earlier this year at Georgia Tech about, some research that I did on this aspect. But I think that policy has a bigger role to play in expanding access to digital literacy, just because the onus should not be on consumers for themselves, to educate themselves on, AI or other, digital technologies, just because this information can be, one, very hard to find, and also more accessible. I'd say like resources are not necessarily tailored, to the general public as well. And so in this work, I propose that the government should be really focused on, providing access, resources, like especially financial resources, to existing community institutions in educational institutions for these resources, and also developing more public messaging on the risk and benefits of AI overall. And with the Congressional Black Caucus happening, this week, I think there's many opportunities for Black policymakers to understand many of the issues, and just policymakers in general to understand many of these issues around AI, and also advocate heavily for them, because in the next year or so, AI will have a very big role to play, particularly within Congress and also other areas of government, as the U.S. speeds towards, hopefully a federal AI law. But hopefully, I would say we would like to see more focus on actually data privacy, because I think it's a very important part of AI government, or AI governance. And so, again, I think that, and also as the U.S. considers its role, in the AI ecosystem, or with competitiveness being one of the primary aspects of how the U.S. is approaching AI governance, I think they really have to take a step lower down to understand about how to actually govern its risks and ensure that communities, especially the Black communities, which are have shown to be at harm and at most risk to the negative impacts of AI, are thoroughly protected, and also are able to have agency as AI increasingly becomes integrated within society.
I'll go to the individual level. So I would say, go online, find a fun generative AI tool and see what it can do. You don't necessarily need to sign up for the tools. to put a couple prompts in for it to create something. And so one day, I think it was, I won't say which conference, on a Sunday for 9 hours, I was sequestered in this room. So I was in the back playing with all these different, Gen AI apps, right? They can read different PDFs, they can take different prompts, they can write up stuff. And I was like, this is pretty cool. And so I was listening too, really, I was. It was 9 hours on a Sunday. But I really kind of was having fun with seeing what I could create. And then I said, wait, if I use this AI app to create this document, does it know that an AI tool or app, whatever, I use that to create it? Or can they discern a human from the AI tool? So I'm going back and forth. And of course it cannot, right? It could not determine whether or not it was an AI or human that created it. So I just had a fun time just sitting down and playing. I didn't need to sign up for anything. If I was really concerned about, it taking my data, which I was, and I could always go into Google Chrome, go incognito mode, you know what I mean? Or just, so you can play around with these different apps and tools just to see what it can do. So I think many of us, we kind of get really nervous and, oh my goodness, it's going to take over my life. Hopefully it will take over my driving because, I don't drive very well. But anyway, that's another story. But play with it to kind of pull down the veil to see what's really there, what's really behind it. I remember when we have an Atlanta University Center Data Science Club, and they said, Dr. Washington, we want to do a AI and ethics event. I said, really? Why don't you do like ChatGPT Unplugged and kind of see what it can do, then talk about the ethical components? Because it's hard to talk about ethics, bias, considerations, what needs to be done for a tool that somebody doesn't know anything about. I said, so do ChatGPT Unplugged, have fun with it, and then go into the discussion of how should we talk about ethics? How should we talk about bias? Because many of us, I think, here and potentially on the Hill, we're talking about these tools and technologies as if it's something in the other room, and we haven't even played on it yet, right? And so for faculty, for both the NSF National Data Science Alliance and AUC Data Science Initiative, we offer workshops for HBCU faculty and staff to dive into different topical areas. We did one, it was really fun. It was on low-code, no-code AI. That was back in May. We have another one coming up on introduction to AI and machine learning. And so just providing those opportunities where someone can come into it and say, well, what is that and how is it? And in higher education, as we like to say, there's also YouTube University. And so there are different lectures one can find. We have an AUC Data Science Seminar Series. It's virtual. Our Friday speaker at noon will be talking about AI and its tools that he's using to help empower educational institutions. He's worked a lot with Howard University as far as how can AI be used to enhance the educational experiences there. And so there are different opportunities to kind of dive in, look, see. But I would say just from the individual level, obviously you can check out our AUC Data Science Seminar Series. It's also on YouTube, YouTube University. But then dive into some of these tools, see what it can do, see what it can't do, but then also take a step back and say, how is it pulling my data? Do I really want to give all of this information away? So have some discernment on both ends. And then the second part is, I would say grown folk, I've been 25 twice is how I like to say it. You've been 26 twice. So I've been 25 twice. And so grown folk, sit down with your kids. They're using AI, I think, in really cool ways. And just ask them, how are you using it? In what ways? How does it help? Just ask them the how, what questions to pull out of them. Because young folks are not really walking into AI afraid or scared, but they're kind of walking in with, ooh, what can it do for me? And so they have a lot of, I think, valuable information about how it can be used, where it can be used, and perhaps then you can have a discussion around when is it appropriate, when is it not. But I would say come in with an open mind and just kind of, what I always like to say is, dive into data.
Yeah, I might just add one thing here around the geography question, which kind of points to like what, in some ways, what needs to happen more for also individual students, say in high school and community college. But one of the ways this all plays out is extreme divergence among places where the winners, the technology winners, pull away further. And I think that's a problem that we need, and it's a subset of this problem that we're talking about. And there's a way, one way to intervene within that is for the federal government, since we're here talking about the election, there have been several big federal efforts to try to intervene with this. And I'm thinking of one called the National AI Research Resource, which is actually explicitly trying to democratize the location of AI basic research, and especially AI education for say college and graduates. And this is an effort to channel funds into places that need more computing, more training, make sure that HBCUs are connected. So that we're explicitly trying to talk about this. The problem is we're not funding it significantly, but this is a very tangible way to use, to work across place to try to intervene in these issues. I think that's a very promising way to do it, but again, it's not large, but I think that's one promising way to attack some of this.
Okay, I think we're probably ready to start taking a couple of questions from the audience. If they can start lining up by the microphone, that'd be good. In the meantime, something that was said here about what individuals can do, I think is so important that I'm going to step out of moderator role for just 1 second so I can reiterate to our students the importance of playing around with the technology. Play around with it, experiment with it. Experts in the field often talk about the jagged frontier of AI, meaning that there are some things that you would think it would be really good at and it's really bad at. And there's some things you would think it would be really bad at and it's really good at. And sometimes those two things don't seem like they're very far apart. So unless you play with it and tinker with it, you won't know what that frontier looks like. And when you do know what that frontier looks like, you become extremely valuable in industry, no matter what field you're in. All right, so I'm back into moderator role. All right, we've got a couple of students. We'll start over here.
Hi, again, I'm Sheridan Lyles. I'm a junior psychology major, public health minor, concentration in mental health. And as someone who's done a little bit of policy work at the state level, I'm interested in what ways that AI is being discussed, especially when it comes to violence. I know we haven't really discussed that. We've talked a lot about the way that AI can affect jobs, but there's also a very harmful, violent aspect of AI that can be used for like producing harmful images, deep fake videos that can be very, very traumatizing. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Taylor Swift images that were like circulating across the internet that did spark some type of legal action, but there isn't exact language on how this should be handled in a legal space. So what do you all expect to change at the state or federal level regarding violence in AI?
So, many law schools now are incorporating artificial intelligence into the education of future lawyers, right? And so, we're an educational institution, right? And at Spelman, we say we face the future unafraid. I would say that, from the legal perspective, we need to have those who are in the trial rooms, who are actually processing, understand AI. Also, the policymakers understand how AI should influence policies and how they should be there. I'm still traumatized by the one with VP Harris and former President Trump. Y'all, did you see that one? Where she was pregnant? Yeah, don't look at it. It was terrible. It was all terrible. And it was his baby kind of thing. Yeah, it was terrible. Yeah, so I'm still traumatized. And so how do we create laws in a way that keep up with technology so we're not just chasing it, but then how do we create laws in a way that it's not an overreach, it actually will protect and it will we'll say, mitigate peace, right, or amplify peace. And so we do need those in the legal profession at all levels, from lawyers to judges to senators, for, as you say, the city, state, federal levels, to really understand this thing of artificial intelligence. Because if you look right now, like I said before, if you look on the Hill, there's a whole bunch, everybody's throwing some bills in AI, right? And I remember here in Georgia, I talked with somebody, they said, oh yeah, we've talked to, I'll say the other institutions. I said, well, have you come to the historically black colleges, universities ones, and asked us what we think? Well, no. And so there's also, I think, to Kamal's point, that we need to make sure that we're all there working on this, co-working on this together. And like my amazing moderator here says, we all need to have some sort of acumen around artificial intelligence. It will impact us. And to be that champion for positive change, we have to understand kind of what it is to a certain degree, and understand how we can address and also amplify, we'll say, the positive aspects.
Thank you.
Hi again, my name is Cadence Patrick. I'm a senior computer science major at Spelman College from Oakland, California. And so I'm writing my senior research paper on Gen AI, specifically in the context of intellectual property and this sort of like gray area we're in, where there's like no real legal definitions, but there's a very clear ethical dilemma that's been...
Cadence, can you come closer to the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. I can take my mask off. So I don't know how much you heard, but there's a legal free-for-all, but there's an ethical dilemma that is becoming more and more clear. And so I've been trying to think about, like, you know, how do we work together as a society if we're so at odds, where there's a non-trivial group of people who are dismissive of the work of people who are dismissive of AI, if that makes sense. And so here's my question, how can we as students, educators, leaders in the space, any of our roles, how can we look out for the people who are informed and have worked with the technology and still have concerns about how we can use it responsibly and ethically?
Can we, repeat the first part of it? Say again?
How can we as students, educators, leaders in the space, et cetera, look out for people who are informed and have worked with the technology and still have concerns about how we can use it responsibly?
So it's those that are informed, looking out for those who are uninformed, is that it?
We're leaders at Spelman, so yes.
Yeah, sorry, I just, here.
Can I just start?
Of course, go ahead.
So the intellectual property is an interesting one, right? So I remember back in the days, you know, people would remix music sort of thing, and who owns what, right? And we saw one of the candidates get sued by another artist because they used their song, right? But in using AI that can pull from different data sources, who has ownership, right? And then, you know, if you, as an individual, if you give your data away and they use it to build a model and to do something else, do you really own your data anymore? And so that idea of ownership, the idea of intellectual property, that's an important, I think, issue that will be tackled and needs to be tackled. But there's just one concept in higher education that we like to say we prepare our students to do. That's to think critically. And so that aspect of critical thinking, to discern, to ask the questions, to uncover, to say, how can we support different communities? What is the real issue? And not to have our own background cloud the reality of what we're seeing, but we're actually seeing the people we want to serve. We actually see them for where they are and ask, how can we support them in this, we'll say, new AI era? And so I would say, as a leader, to think critically, ask questions, and never assume that you know everything. The person who really thinks they know everything, that's a dangerous person. And so you want to be that person to say, there's more that I don't know. Let me see if I can dig and find more information. And so that's what I would rest on, to really think critically, because we don't really have it right now. We're figuring it out. It's a problem. It's an issue. We're seeing it now in images. We're hearing it in music. We're reading it in works, we'll say. How do we tackle that? And to be frank, a lot of this stuff, y'all gonna have to pick it up and figure it out. But rest assured, critical thinking at the end of the day and asking questions, you will arrive at the answer to help different communities.
And it's all the important, even more important, given how much uncertainty surrounds all of this. I mean, one of the starting points that Molly and I take is we don't know, the companies don't really know. This is essentially a black box technology that's very intriguing, but also potentially scary. And we don't know what the skills that are truly durable are. We at one point, we're thinking we were trying to identify, what are the tasks that would be augmented by these technologies, and it's not really very clear. And and the people at OpenAI are very skeptical that that even exists as a category. So I think that just really accentuates the importance of the kind of just constantly interrogating everything, trying to sort out what you think about things on your own, because there's tremendous uncertainty around this technology.
Can I add a quick thought? Since I have an unusual, for me at least, connection to this institution, and perhaps I'm a romantic about tradition. So Spelman started in 1881. That's essentially right after Reconstruction. So 1865, 1877, those years, those 12 years was kind of the American Reconstruction. Then in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson came, and there was another century of Jim Crow. So this institution was born in Reconstruction. The whole premise of it was to make sure that our people had access to the education and literacy coming out of slavery such that we could survive and be American citizens. So at this stage, essentially 100 some change years later, the question that's being asked is how do we look at around and figure out what to do? What is the significance relative to policy issues and violence and the like? The challenge here is that there is an analogous subtext to it, where are these legal and social forces trying to put us back into a box, into this digital slavery, as I'll call it. That's the version of it for this season of our American story. And I could imagine in 2026, when we start talking about America's 250 years old, it's going to be flags all over the place, and this is the greatest country that we've ever seen and whatever. But our people have been suffering the entire time. And this institution is one of the bulwarks against that very suffering. So as students, I would say, you're asking about specific things. I think to this point that Talitha just made about being critical, be relevant to the institution's tradition. And therefore, the question that has to be asked is, what are you going to do? Because they're coming for us. And I'm turned up about it because I think that this AI discussion that we're having is a cloak. It's a ruse so that our attention is over here, but over here our existence is being taken away from us. And to that extent, that's the whole premise of being at an elite institution like Spelman, so that you don't lose sight. Your critical civic responsibility is not easily fooled because you're so highly educated and come from an institution like this. So that, to me, is a response to those two particular questions and how I see them as joined.
Rest assured, us Spelmanites, we are not easily fooled.
I know it.
Right? We have a choice to change the world.
That was for the viewers online.
I love it. I love it.
Cadence, did that answer your question? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the balanced conversation here in this panel. My name is Rihanna Lynn. I run a company, Journey Foods, scientist, entrepreneur. And I'm going to ask you a question about builders. But first, I wanted to highlight some points. One being that at my company now, we are observing how many jobs we are replacing with our AI, and how much money we are saving the many global companies around the world that we work with. We help companies essentially replace food scientists and supply chain managers. You mentioned earlier that Tuskegee was working on testing and experiencing AI tractors, where I work with a lot of the top Black farmers in the country. Out of thousands, tens of thousands of Black hobby farmers, 300 Black farmers that actually have over 50 acres of land and can make more than 100K of living per year. And being that even though we have several dozen million-dollar farmers, only 9 of those farmers can afford a $900,000 AI tractor. And what I'm seeing in this conversation and across the board, especially when you have co-founders, for example, of ChatGPT raising $1 billion in weeks just to create security AI firms, which can probably down the road and not too far future replace tens of thousands of cybersecurity jobs. I believe that I believe it's important to highlight and to build communities in academia around best practices and exposure to AI. But when you have Harvard Business School students training on how to leverage and augment AI right now, and having been experiencing these things for 3 years, they're ahead of the curve. But what I do think that if we don't build and incorporate education around building on top of these systems, being AI builders, we are just going to become AI slaves to the system, and that divide, as you mentioned, Mark, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, is rapid, and it's expanding, and it's becoming something that I truly think in the next couple years be at peril around. So for me, I would like to know if any of you can answer the question around how we and institutions like these in the AUC and Atlanta and Georgia, these places and beyond, really build systems for builders on AIs and not consumers at a much more urgent pace.
Yeah, so we do the building at HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, as far as developing the content. Another example, I know I've given previous ones, Florida A&M University has an AI-wide initiative, both on the education and research side, and is infusing it into their curriculum. And we also support faculty, staff, through communities of practice to develop curriculum, data science, data-related fields. Obviously, that includes artificial intelligence. So at the historically black colleges and universities, we are doing AI. We are infusing it. Do we have enough? No. Are we doing it? Yes. Do we need more support? Like he said, yes, we need more support. Because like the other he said, we're in this post George Floyd. I remember in 2020, when I first started as director of the AUC Data Science Initiative, everybody wanted to fund us. And it was overwhelming. Now, 4 years later, I'm like, where'd everybody go? This work is still important. And this digital divide, it could come. And if we do have this digital divide between not the haves and the have-nots, those that have AI and those that don't, those that create AI and those that don't, if that gap gets wider, it's going to be bad for everybody. And so there's I don't know if it's apathy or just the laissez-faire, like we'll just let AI propagate and we'll just see. I don't know. That sense of urgency in 2020, I don't see it anymore, surprisingly. It's the same people. But anyway, so we are at historically black colleges, universities, we are positioning folks to create AI, both at the K-12. Here at the Lane University Center, we had a working group for data science across K-12, and we do have our teacher educators here working in the schools. We hosted a robotics camp with the CIA that was right around the corner here that engaged the students in the work. We probably need to talk about it louder because there's a lot of media and a lot of noise that we're not, but we are. Do we need more resources, more support? Yes, we need more resources, more support, because as you have noted, there's a lot of work and access that needs to be achieved.
Okay, I think that's probably our last. We've got one. Can we take one more? One more question?
I guess I'm the last one. So really quickly, I'm a filmmaker. I'm also a graduate of Spelman, class of 1993. And I do a lot of projects that are educational in nature for my clients and have been using AI in those projects. So as an example, we just completed a training video for Alameda County Department of Public Health that is about incident command systems, which is the protocol that's used for any emergency. but they wanted us to make the training specific to using ICS for infectious diseases. And so I fed the AI a bunch of information from a bunch of sources, had it write a script for me, which was trash. Then, made some modifications, also adjusted my prompts, had it write a new script, and even was able to adjust it a little bit in terms of the voice of the script, which I think is a really important thing for young people to know, is that process of iteration with AI. It's not just feed it once, and as you guys are playing with it that are older, it's not just feed it once, it's feed it multiple times. Having said that, I'm really curious, and the reason I knew to do that is because I split my time between Oakland and Atlanta and had talked to Black folks in the AI space, and they were like, the thing you need to learn in order to stay competitive in your field is prompts, right? Are there other things that those of us who are not authoring AI but want to work with it, want to integrate it into our work, should be skilling up?
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to comment on the last question regarding, developing creators of technologies and not just consumers. And I talk about that all the time. And I think we can't just rely on curriculum from outside of our institutions because we don't know what the goals and objectives of that curriculum is. So we should not just accept it and disseminate it. We should be creators of our curriculum, also, because we know what our objectives are. And so I think it's very important, with regards to our diverse students at Spelman, and they're majoring in, all different majors. We have to meet them where they are and help them create within their own domain, as well as in computer science, because there are institutions or organizations that will give our students the tools, to assist them with developing, for example, software, but will not allow them to use those same tools in their technical interviews. So that creates a divide that you guys have so greatly spoken about, but I'm definitely an advocate of developing creators across all domains. That's what I was going to say. I think that's very important. So I didn't have a question, I just had a comment.
Thank you.
And thank you for allowing me to share on your panel.
Okay, do we need to repeat the question? Yes. Repeat the question, just a glimpse
So
of it.
in addition to learning and getting really intimately familiar with prompts, what are some other skills that I should be adding to my arsenal as this technology takes effect in my business and many others? And I will say, it freed up time that allowed me to have more time to be creative. So there was a benefit to me.
I think you mentioned it. You looked at it and said, this is bad. So it's not just like a copy paste and just roll with it, right? You act critical thinking, right? You looked at it and said, is this really the script that I want? Is this it? Let me try again. So prompt engineering is key, as you said. You can think about the Google search bar. If you put in certain words, you return back different websites. You put in other words, you return in other websites. So those words that you put in will return maybe something that you want or maybe not. And it could also be dependent on the model that's deployed and the information that it pulls from to piece these items together. And then I would also say, be connected in community. What works for other people may or may not work for you, but kind of say, hey, what do you use? How do you use it, right? And so my sister who works at a school in Michigan, they're using it in their admissions. And I said, well, how are you using it? How are you seeing it? What are the pluses and the minuses? And then I always come up with what about the data privacy aspects? How do you ensure that there's not a breach of data? And then how do you make sure you're getting what you want to get? And so I think also being open that there will be other technologies that will come out, so don't hold too tight on one.
Okay, that will have to be the last word. I'm going to do one quick, 1 second response kind of question. Many of our students, this will be their first time voting in November. How important is it for them to understand the philosophical and legislative agendas of the two primary political parties on a scale of 1 to 10. Lita.
Don't stop at president. You got to go judges.
1 second.
You got to go district attorneys. You got to go to your city council. You need to go down the ballot and research everybody on that ballot. Many people, they go to the president and they think that's it. No.
Don't be
you
a
gotta,
rule breaker.
So I'm a Spelmanite, so you got to, you know, we take the mic. But you've got to understand who you're voting for in each and every level, because who you vote for at the city level may determine, y'all saw what happened Sunday with the football, right? So that can happen. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? The football player? Okay, great. And so, but from the city, every level, you got to do the research. You got to put the time in, because that time you don't take could be an impedance on your own liberty and freedom. Sorry, you got to do it all, the whole ballot.
Yeah, I just changed my registration to DC, so I can't vote for president, but I would echo what Dr. Washington said.
That's a 10?
Yes.
I need a number from 1 to 10. Mark.
Yeah, 10 for me.
Mark.
10.
All right, there you have it. You've heard it from the panel of experts. The answer is 10. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panel and enjoy the rest of the day.
Okay, and I'll get back to you. Thanks.